There you go. Go forward.
Good evening and welcome to the Audit and Transparency Committee. I'm Councillor Gerard Hargreaves and I'm chairing the meeting this afternoon. And welcome to those new members on the committee, which I include myself, and to our guests. And perhaps in a moment you could just introduce yourselves, as you don't have the name badges. But in June 2017, 72 of our residents tragically lost their lives in a fire at Grenfell Tower. So I ask every member of the committee to pay our deepest and continuing respects in a conventional manner by marking the moment with 72 seconds silence now.
Thank you.
Thank you. Perhaps we've all got name badges here. Can you just whiz down and introduce yourselves? I feel you've got a name badge. Just introduce yourself.
So, thank you, Jim. Good afternoon. I'm Tri-Borough Director for Treasury Pensions at Westminster City Council.
I'm David Green from Marling Place, the Council's retained Treasury Management Advisors.
I'm Ewan McAlpine from Royal London Asset Management. I'm the Investment Director within the Fixed Income team in which your portfolio is run.
I'm Andrew Cunningham, also from Royal London Asset Management. I'm the Senior Account Manager looking after the relationship of Kensington and Chelsea.
Hi, Matt Dawson. I work for Phil predominantly on Treasury across the Tri-Borough and now Bexley.
Thank you.
Hi, I'm Singrong. I'm Treasury Manager of RBKC. I work for Phil and Matt.
Good. So is anybody back in the office? Just to continue around the table, because some of us are new, yeah.
Oh, well, hello everyone. I'm Andrew Ling. I was one of the first co-opted members onto the committee, so I'm not a councillor, and I've been a member since 2003.
Gosh.
And I'm Liz Marrell. I'm an independent co-opted member as well, I think from March 2020.
I'm Callum Sutherland. I'm the Governance Officer that will be clerk in this committee.
Emma Don't Code, Labour Councillor and Group Leader. And I've been on this committee for on and off for a long time. It's the best one.
Joanna Gardner, been off 6 years, and prior to that I was Vice Chairman.
Good. Great. Good. As Gerard Hargreaves, Ward Councillor, and I'm taking over as Chair of this committee.
I'm Sidney Yagson, I'm a Ward Councillor, I'm Vice Chairman.
Good, thank you. And we have a number of staff here supporting us who will introduce themselves on the items of the agenda. Is that the best way to do it? Thank you. Good. So item A1, to note the membership of the committee, and the Chair and Vice Chair has agreed at the Council meeting on the 25th of May, as set out above on the agenda front sheet. So that's just to note. Item number 2, I shall now report apologies for absence or lateness from this meeting. Received any apologies, Colin?
Receive no apologies.
Yes, yeah. Okay. Received notice of lateness? No. Okay, thank you. Item 3, declaration of interest. Does any member have a disclosable pecuniary interest in any of the matters before the committee this evening? No. Thank you. And conform minutes of the meeting held on the 23rd of March and the 25th of May. It's going to be a challenge for some of us because we weren't at the meeting, so we're going to have to remind those of you who were. The minutes of the previous meeting and the special meeting at full council on the 25th of May have been circulated. Are these now agreed as a correct record?
Are you talking about the May meeting?
The March meeting.
I just got a couple of corrections, if that's okay.
Yeah.
On A5 on Treasury management, Liz Murrell asked why the council was seemingly borrowing. I think the point I was making was why the council was seemingly borrowing so much at such high rates when the returns on the investments are so low.
Okay.
Okay, there was that. And then I think there was just Andrew Ling on the last page, page 8, replied in response that he wished to be assured before he could assure members of the public and the co-opted members were independent of the council. I think, Andrew, you just said that you assured members of the public and that the co-opted members were independent. There seems to be two assureds in that sentence.
Yeah, that's correct.
Okay.
Yeah, thank you for that.
So with those corrections, are we happy to take those as a true record? Thank you very much.
So matters arising, Chair?
Matters arising from that?
There's quite a few points, Chair, that where I and other members have asked questions of Mr. Hughes. And some of them have indeed been explained back from some in an email we got today saying that a lot of the information wasn't yet ready. I'm just finding it a bit difficult.
Yes, I was too.
Yeah.
Agreed. There were quite a few that weren't mentioned in the action tracker, and I understand we might lose the points.
Yes. So that was my concern is I'm just getting confused with that. And I just feel
Yeah, do you want to join us at the table?
Check.
First of all, is there anything specific you want an answer to now, rather than the system of tracking?
it's a bit of both actually, but it's definitely the system. And I know that you've been having problems. You're short in your team. That's
Indeed.
as your email said. But I just want to be sure that all these points are going through and will indeed come back to us.
It will indeed. So I'll pick up with Callum as well to make sure that everything on the action tracker at the back is reflected. What's in the minutes, so just to make sure that we have picked up everything's actions, so we track them, and also to reassure that we will bring back those reports and those items to you as we go forward as well.
Okay. Thank you.
Could I just ask, was there a maturity analysis ever circulated in the A5?
Chairman, that's included in the slide pack with our advisors, and I also have a separate line of the maturity values which I can issue.
Yeah, so just to perhaps emphasise the process, I guess that this is the only meeting I've ever been to where the actions of the previous meeting are in the back page.
Yes.
So I sort of read papers from the agenda and try and remind myself what went on at the last meeting, and the key thing is the actions of agreed. So if that could be put forward. And just a second thing, are we going to have an agenda item just to discuss the rental expenditure action, or do you think that that's now deferred till October?
So I'd be happy under AOB if the chair is happy to have a discussion about that and just to agree the next steps, if that's okay.
Anything else you want to raise then on the minutes? So we will get a different look next time that will actually highlight where the actions are indicated. Okay, thank you. So item 5. The committee has a report that went to the leadership team, which recommended that the report should go to full council. So, who's going to introduce this report?
Myself, Jeff.
Okay.
Thank you. Nice to be here and talk to the committee. I'm very respectful of the length of the agenda that you've got this evening, but I don't want to rush through this. But I'll be as quick as I can. So, from the matters arising, Councillor Williams and Liz that recommended that we bring along a discussion document on premiums and discounts and some more clarification on money market funds, which David from Ireland Close will introduce after this report. To summarise this particular report, if I could ask the committee to turn to point 5.1. Now, remember, this only covers us to outturn, which was March. Since March, the landscape has moved immeasurably. So, if I could ask the committee to look at the total average rate at March 21, very much still in COVID interest rates, nice pickup in the year to just north of 0.5%. We will have seen significant improvement since that day as the Bank of England base rate has had another 3 rises. If you believe what the market is saying, there's at least another 4 to take place in the near future. So nothing different done in the investment approach. It's just that the base rate has moved. The money market funds don't actually take that long at all to rebalance themselves and to give you a bit of pickup in rates. So your rates now would be north of 1%. So although this is only 4 months old, it does look incredibly dated. At 6.2, this is a loan analysis, and it just shows the profiling of all of the loans from RBKC. There was no new debt taken on in the year. Actually, cash balances stayed relatively stable. Obviously, in any given year, there are peaks and troughs, but at or around 200 million is typical. So there was no new borrowing taken in the year. We have seen borrowing rates increase. We've seen money put on gilts in this calendar year. But as we've seen cash also improve, the actual cost of carry hasn't worsened. So whereas the PWLB loan at 2 point something, if you're earning nothing, that is all cost of carry. It might be 3% now, but your cash is doing better. So the gap between cost of carry actually hasn't worsened. A bit about CapEx on 7, so 17% underspend on capital through the year. Again, this would have been factored into the need to either borrow or not borrow. And because we didn't take any further financing, we stayed within the authorised limit and the operational boundary. So all prudential indicators were adhered to and complied with. At section 9, it just reminds the committee at 9.1 what we can and can't do. So actually, predominantly, you are still money market fund based with bits and pieces lent to banks. There's no local authorities anymore, and a small allocation to short-term investment grade bonds, which Royal London will talk about after David. I wouldn't give a lot of credence to 9.2 and 9.3. That this was the world as at the 31st of March. It's materially different now. 9.4 shows where the money was. 9.6, the allocation to Royal London Asset Management. So in regard to outturn, far better than the prior year as interest rates increased. We will expect the trend to continue. But I do quite like the graph at 10.2, if I could ask the committee to, because that actually gives you the light blue, sort of what looks like a skyline, shows your level of cash in the year, and the dark blue line you'll see in January and February when the Bank of England started to raise interest rates. You'll see something like a palatable investment return come back to, and if we were to put another 4 months on that, you'd see it increase again. So considering when we were in COVID, and we were literally down to 1 basis point in your money market funds. It's very welcoming to see this investment income coming back into the fund. Appendix A just shows that we were in compliance with the Prudential Code. There is extra reporting that will come onto this next year. There's another indicator which will be bolted on, and bits and pieces around strategy, but that hasn't. The reporting requirement starts next financial year. And Appendix B is where your money was as at the close of the financial year.
Okay.
Take questions, Joe.
Thank you. And we're obviously, this is history in a way, isn't it? So, are there any questions from Matthew, please, from the members? Yeah.
Could I just go to 6.2? I just understand when you've got the Public Works Loan Board, which is offering a very reasonable interest rate, and then when you look at the rates that are here, what can we do to address particularly the 7.5s and the 5s and the 4%?
It doesn't look desirable, but the premiums imposed on you to repay. The issue with it is at the time you take the PWLB loan out, the government takes a gilt out to match it. So the government is stuck paying that gilt. So the premium that you'd have to pay would make good all of that extra interest. So
every time you take out a PWLB loan.
Yes. Yes. So yeah, they don't look. Yeah, they would have been reasonable interest rates at the time, but yeah.
Okay, thank you very much, Chairman. I just had some trouble tying in the capital expenditure and the capital financing requirement in 7.2 and 7.4 to the accounts, the balances. So it was just, we have to have some clarity around that at some point. Maybe you need to revert to me. And I also wondered why in 10.1, why the weighted average return on deposits in 21-22 is 0.12% compared with 0.52% for the previous year, when interest rates have been rising, or have I misunderstood something? And also in Appendix B, I noted that we no longer have any investments with local authorities. I presume that's been a general policy, because I think we used to get quite good returns on those. And also I wondered what had happened to the DBS deposit, because that had matured in April.
Okay. So if we get back to you on the capex,
yeah.
That 10.1 does look like it's inverted. It's 0.52 for 21-22 and 0.12 for the previous year. The DBS matured, and local authorities, it was decided, I think partially decided at this committee that, well, until very recently there was no illiquidity premium for investing with local authorities, and there were fewer local authorities asking for money. That trend has reversed, so there are now opportunities. It's not something we're doing for many councils at the moment. It really depends on your outlook. So 3-6 months, banks still offering. Yeah, banks are still offering better in the short term.
So what has happened to the DBS deposit?
It's matured, I think.
Matured.
Rolled over.
Rolled over.
Okay.
It's 3 months.
Okay. Just one question, Chair. On the RBKC borrowing figures, we've got a short-term loan that's expiring in November 2022, £5 million principal at 7.75. What does the strategy look like for that?
It's a judgment call. So at 5 million, 5 million is not a triggering event in itself that you would think. If that 5 was 50, we'd be talking about it now. We're talking about how to phase that return. At 5 million, I would say that would form part of the discussion that we'd have in year if we need to borrow at all, because cash reserves are at 200 million. If you were a smaller local authority with cash at 50 and a lot of expenditure marked for quarter three, that 5 million becomes a very important number. But sitting here today on your cash reserves, it would just mature.
Any other questions? Thank you. Have we got anything else under? Yeah.
So if I could just introduce David Green, who is our client director at Arlen Close, whose job it is to look after Treasury management interests.
Yeah, hi everyone. You've got that as a separate printout, I think, ready to type. Large.
There's the red one. Or more red.
No red, no red here.
Right. So, we're a company of about 20 staff, and when I say we, you'll retain Treasury advisors. That means the council pays us a fixed fee every year, and you can ask us any questions you like and ask us to appear at committees and on training events. And we meet with Matt and Phil and Zing and Karen and the team regularly and discuss investments and borrowing. So because we pay a fixed fee, I mean, I'm not inclined to push you to buy anything that you might not want because it earns you a commission, because we don't get any commission. And we're also not paid for performance either. So I advise you to do what I would do if I was in Matt's job. So that's how we run things. So I've been asked to cover a few things. I'll start with money market funds on slide 2. I don't want to make this a training course, but the idea is lots of institutions, lots of people with money invest in a fund, and that fund then lends your money on to between 20 and 40 banks. And exactly what the fund earns on the banks, it pays back to you, minus an agreed fee. That fee is between 0.1 and 0.2%. And so it's a way of spreading your cash over lots of banks, spreading the risk, spreading the risk of default. Because if one of those 40 banks goes under, that's only 1/40th, 25% of your cash gone. And it spreads the interest rates because they will lend various different deposits at various rates between 1 day and 1 year, but with an average of around 45 days. Average length of those. This was somewhat of a question from the previous committee, wasn't it, really? We like them, they're very secure, because you've got that spread, you've got that expert fund management. I very much think if you deal with a fund manager, if you're a money market fund or bond funds in it, they're on your side. Usually when you deal with the financial services industry, they're working against you. You put your money in the bank's going to try and pay you as little interest as it can, and it's going to tell you it's very safe if it's not. I was invited to go and visit Icelandic banks, and they showed me how safe they were, and they went bust the next month. The fund managers, they get judged on what you get judged, which is on the rate of return and how safe your money is. So they're always working on your side. I think, sorry, to run about Iceland, 100 more local authorities had money at risk in Iceland. No money market fund did. That's just something about the difference between trusting to a manager to look after your money. Liquidity point. So although these are invested between a day and a year and 45-day average, you have daily access to your cash because not all investors want the money back on the same day. And even if they did, they make investments they can sell. Locked-in investments, which you tend to be invested. And then you get 1 day access, but with say 45-day term, the terms tend to be longer. you can invest tends to be higher than what you can invest for. And the reduced administration. So you're making one investment to spread your money rather than having to make 20 or 40 investments yourself. There's cost reduction there. So it's just a product we think ticks all the boxes you're looking for, really. So we're very supportive of local authorities there. Slide 3 shows a range of funds. If you can see a black dot labelled MMF right near 00, that's money market funds. So for over the past 5 years, they've earned about 0.4% per annum average, and no volatility. And what I'm showing this chart, I've got volatility or risk going across the x-axis and return going up the y-axis, and that's total return. So that is income paid to you and capital gains minus capital losses. And generally, you can move to bonds, to diversified funds, to equity funds, and take more risk, more return. So June 22, as Matt discussed, has been a bit of a low point in the bond markets. So a lot of these are depressed. A more typical 5-year period would show you more of a straight line through the middle there. You've got a bit of a curve hugging the zero axis.
Have there been issues with property funds in the COVID-19? Whether they had to suspend and
Yes, then redemptions, yes.
Yeah.
But you wouldn't invest in property hoping to draw your money out at short notice either. So probably yes, those funds they look very good, don't they? Low risk, high return. The chart doesn't show you the cost of entry and exit. So things like stamp duty and estate agent fees.
And also that they closed secretly.
Yeah.
Indeed, yes. So yeah, and that's one of the reasons they look better on risk return, volatility / return, because it hides some of the other risks and costs.
We have a very conservative policy, so would property funds be within our?
Of the Treasury.
No, sorry. Yeah.
Pension fund, yes.
They're in the pension fund, but we don't invest in pool funds. We buy direct. We have a separate direct property portfolio.
Investment properties,
But we do have local authority clients in all those funds. But there's local authorities there who've got a pile of money and they know they're never going to spend it. You're not in that position, you've got plans to spend, so it wouldn't be appropriate for you to talk down there. But I wanted to show you that we're going to discuss maybe the Royal London Fund looks quite risky. It's the one with the black arrows, the lowest risk of the 6 red bond funds there. It's the Royal London Fund. I'll show you that it's in the scale of what's possible, it's at the lower end of the risk. But a step up from those money market funds, which look base rate. So I'll move on to the Royal London Fund on slide 4. I've got 2.5 years of history here, because that's the sort of the average duration of the fund. So you buy bonds from 0 to 5 and longer years, but on average they tend to be around 2.5 years. So that's the sort of period of time you should be analysing this fund over. You've been invested for 8 months. You invested at the black arrow there, 25 million in, and on Friday that was worth about 23.6, 3.7 million, so about 1.3, 1.4 million down. But 8 months is not a period over which to evaluate a 2.5-year bond fund. As you can see, there was the sharp drop at March 20 was obviously COVID hit, and recovery within a few months there. And it's back above, and then falling down. So the impact of inflation, people thinking rates weren't going to rise. You may remember early November, everyone was expecting the Bank of England to raise bank rate and they didn't. And that's why there's a little blip up before the arrow. And then shortly after you invested, people didn't expect the Bank of England to raise rates in December. It never raised it the week before Christmas before, but it did. So that was a start of a surprise. And the market is sort of further surprised by how rigorous the Bank of England was willing to raise rates and almost only prompt a recession. we never thought the banking would deliberately push the UK economy into recession, and we do think that's what it has to do. Because it sees inflation as such a it's the lesser of the two evils. It's to have a recession.
Yeah. And then in terms of that against the index, any comments on that? It seems to track it reasonably well. Doesn't it?
Very close, isn't it? Yes. That's an index of every sterling bond with a duration less than 5 years, except government bonds. So it does include some quasi-government bonds, such as supranationals, which tend to have a bit like so. There's slight underperformance against the index there, but it's quite marginal. It's explained by funding slightly more in the corporate bond space than the quasi-government space. But it's, I mean, I was surprised how closely tracking.
As you say, it's marginal, but it was doing really well in terms of the tracking until the last couple of months.
Yes,
but it's only marginal.
But yes, it's proving it, the manager's not at fault. It's what you suffer from the market, not suffering from the manager. Okay, number 5 is very much a training course, really. We've got this bonds are fixed income products. Yeah, so the yield rises, the price falls, vice versa. And broadly, the duration of the bond, so the length of time is left of the bond, shows you how exposed it is to those changes. So we've got a 2.5 year to maturity bond in the red box. It's paying 1% interest a year. That's what they call the coupon. That's the cash you get from it, 1%. If the market yield is 1%, so the yield and coupon are the same, and the price of the bond is £100. If we then move to the right and the yield rises to 3%, market thinks interest rates are going up a lot. I'm only going to invest in a 2.5 year bond, I'll get 3% income. The price has got to fall for the new investor who's going to buy it off you to get that 3%. It's roughly 2% change in the yield multiplied by the 2.5 years of the coupon. It drops nearly £5. Blue one is just another bond. If you've gone into a more strategic bond fund with a 7.5 year average maturity, yield's gone from 2 to 4, you'd have seen a £13. So it goes. I guess the silver lining is over the remaining life of the bond is still going to pay that 1% per year cash flow to you. So you get a higher yield because if you account for the price fall, you're then going to get a yield of 3%. 2.5 years. Because the price once insured at £100. So it's a temporary loss or a paper loss, people call it. Unless you're actually going to sell out of the fund, you're not going to realise that loss. So you can still collect the income, the fund pays you, you don't have to realise the loss until you sell. And being a relatively small part of your portfolio, you should never be forced to. Okay, the other bit was on loan premiums discounts. Well, premiums.
Chairman, may I just ask a question in context? So how long have you been an advisor to the borough?
So to the borough, you appointed us within the last 2 years.
Okay. So in that time, so if I'm thinking about 10 years ago, we had zero risk appetite. I think Councillor Lightfoot, surname, remember, never wanted us to invest in anything that had any risk of putting his money in the cash box of the Treasury.
Yeah.
So you come in 2 years ago. What advice did you give, and to what extent have we followed it?
Mm-hmm. Well, investing in the Royal London Fund was
that's one thing, yeah.
As I said, I would like to judge that performance over 2.5 years, not 8 months. Mm-hmm. I'm also encouraging you to, rather than borrowing for money you plan to spend, borrow money you actually spend.
Oh yes, definitely.
And Kensington and Chelsea is not alone with this. This is very common in local authorities. We see debt going up to spend, but they don't spend it on time, or it's delayed, and investments rise as well. And because you tend to borrow long-term fixed and investments are variable, you build up risk and you build up leverage.
It's a very pertinent point because of the number of conversations we have around the reports. It's puzzlement about why borrowings are high and what cash balances. So to what extent has the authority responded and adopted your recommendations? Or...
Well, you didn't borrow any new money last year.
Okay.
So I don't know if you've borrowed since we were.
Andrew, you're pleased with that? Is that?
Well, I'm very pleased, yes,
Yeah.
because I've banged this drum for a long time, and I think it's a healthy thing. But I just want to get a judge, your experienced and respected advisor, to what extent are we listening?
Yeah, I'm pleased, I think, with that. I mean, I've known some of these people many years now. They're professionals themselves, so it's not like we've got a bunch of amateurs advised by me. Yeah. It's an external challenge ourselves. Yeah, I mean, no, you weren't expecting to have 150, 200 million pound cash in the bank. You know, if we come back a forecast 5 years ago, government has recently had a policy of, we've got a problem to solve, we're not very good at central government, we'll just funnel the money to local government and let them do it. And we'll give them money immediately before we've told them what to do with it, or at the same time. It takes you a while to work out how you're going to distribute business rates, grants for COVID and all that. And in the meantime, that money's sat in your bank account. And it looks like, oh, well, we didn't need to borrow because we've got this cash. So
Actually, a lot of that money then you're saying you sort of ring fenced for specific things that we couldn't use for other things.
Well, yes. Obviously, cash is cash. You don't get pots in the bank account.
Can I ask? I'm just trying to, this is not my specialist area, but I'm very aware that we've got very behind on various our capital projects. So we have had previously borrowed money for them, and then for lots of reasons, COVID being one, Brexit being another, and the costs of going up by 20% of construction being another. And we haven't spent on that. So in the meantime, we're paying interest and the price is going through the roof. Have I got that correct? So there's money which is being eroded, we're paying. The costs have gone up because we were behind for lots of good and bad reasons. So money that we may not have borrowed more, which is, but previously we had money, which we're now paying on and is being eroded. Is that correct?
Yeah, I think broadly.
Okay.
I don't know the extent to it, but
Bingo.
yeah.
All right, no.
And it's a very common problem across local authorities. Nothing unique.
Yeah, and there are some things which are really predictable about the construction market. This is, I work in that field, and these are absolutely predictable for about 5 years. So I'm just a bit worried that we haven't predicted that somehow, that the construction market was really going to struggle, and that would have an effect on our plans. So that's our side, isn't it? Or is that your side to predict that for us?
A bit of both. I wouldn't say we were experts. We would forecast construction industry inflation.
Inflation has been predicted, being it's what would happen. Okay. I just think we're losing on all fronts on that side.
Not losing on all fronts, no. But yeah, if you'd had perfect foresight, you wouldn't have borrowed as much in the past, knowing what you know now. But none of us do have perfect foresight.
I'm slightly conscious of time.
Yeah. I'll talk about premiums and discounts, or premiums on repaying loans. So size 6, you've got 125 million of general fund borrowing, 109 of housing revenue account borrowing. I'll split 5 million of that off because that's repayable. That's the 775 for the 1 year. That can't be repaid early now. You're stuck with that until November. The rest of it you can. The premium is worked out really on the difference between the loan rate and the repayment rate, and then multiply that by the number of years you've got to go. It's discounted back to present value. So your general fund loan is 6.7 million to repay that 125 early, and the HRA 21.5 million to repay that 104 because they're such a low rate.
Yeah.
Well, sorry, because they're such a high rate compared to repayment rate, there's a 2% difference there. That's a big premium. So yeah, we wouldn't have borrowed all this money had we known to have so much cash today. But equally, it's difficult to get out of the loans we've already got. You really are stuck with those. To make it work, you'd have to re-borrow at less than the repayment rate. Today's new, and the PWB, I think it's the underlying above it, PWB sets this repayment rate at 0.91% below the rate of new loans. So it deliberately charges a penalty. Really doesn't want that authorities to repay their loans early. Because a lot of it used to happen, and it's part of the advisor's job was to get people to borrow a loan, repay it the next year, borrow it cheaper, did a lot of that. The government got fed up with it basically, and made it very difficult to repay loans.
Just ask, what was the loan rate of 7.75? What was the loan for? What was it from?
It's from PWB. You've got a start date. It borrowed in 1997. Probably beyond memory of anyone, even Mr. Lynn, as to what.
Okay.
Yeah, and I just I want you to point out, if we look at what the premiums were in November, 92.7 million. So you've gained 64 million pounds by interest rates rising on sort of the paper value. So you may focus on the 1.4 million loss in raw bond fund, but you've gained 64 million. You won't receive that because you don't tend to repay these loans. It's not a real gain, but then it's not a real loss because you don't tend to pay anymore. And I shall leave it there.
Okay, good. Any questions on that from members? Liz, you were raising your eyebrows towards the end there, and
No, I haven't got any questions. It's just, yeah.
Just remind us, Chairman, who approves the Treasury strategy? This committee's job is not the full house strategy, is it? Full council.
yeah, we recommend it to full council.
I don't think we do.
I don't think we do.
Do we not?
Well, no, it's been a sort of bone of contention because this issue about risk appetite is sometimes seen it's too risk averse from certain I see, but I've been reminded the committee isn't responsible for recommending reviewing the Treasury strategy.
The oversight committee?
So it's just an issue that keeps bubbling along and
Yeah, thanks. So the draft strategy goes to leadership team in February, and then it goes on to full council in March. So that's what's set out in the constitution at the moment. So it doesn't come to this committee, it does go, but it does go to leadership team.
when was it last looked at?
It's every year, so it's March of every year, and then it goes on to council. It's normally the first week of March.
Can you just introduce yourself when you speak? We've still got some members here who don't know. Thank you. So, Matthew.
Chairman, I'm conscious of time. We've got Arlan here if the committee would like a quick presentation.
Quick presentation, yes, please. Yeah, as you're here, you come all the way here. You might as well have your quick presentation, please. Yeah.
Thanks. Okay, so I'll try 1 minute to set the scene as where we were perhaps this time last year when the idea of it might help to actually have side by side, so David's slide of the benchmark and the fund performance, and then also we will just move between pages 10, 11, 12 within the public.
You've got, just so members realise, you've got a mini version of it's the same report but just smaller. Okay.
Thanks. So where you will set an investment strategy, the idea of being heavily invested in money market funds and the demand to try and achieve an enhanced level of income return. So the work that we do with All in Close they will select a number of funds, an approved funds list. And one of those funds which is on that approved list is the investment grade short dated credit fund. If we have a quick look, so onto page 10, the fund is £1.5 billion in size. Its benchmark is against the 1 to 5 year sterling non-gilt index. And you can see that the tracking between the red and the blue line on the All in Close slide. And at that time of purchasing this fund, you can see, so I mentioned that timing is everything really. But the yield of that fund at the time was around about 2%. So all things remain consistent. Investing for 1 year at that exact point with a yield of 2%, you expect to receive 12 months' time 2% worth of income distributions, not including movements of capital value. Where we are now, 9 months down the line, roughly 9 months, it was the 22nd of November when we invested in this fund. You can see that there have obviously been a number of external market factors which has impacted the price of the fund. So the fund is priced daily, and the underlying bonds in that fund will impact the price that is valued at. The inverse relationship between price and yield, you will see on slide 12, the top left-hand corner. The gross redemption yield has moved from around about 2 or just over 2% in November 2021 when you first invested. The fund's gross redemption yield is at 4.2%. So that gives you an indication of the impact of the yield and the impact of the price on those underlying instruments. On slide 11 above, the longer term track record of the fund, so 5 years annualised and since inception annualised. The inception of the fund was December 2015. You can see a fairly similar correlation over that 5 to 7, just over 7 years. So the outperformance above the index has been around about 40 basis points, and that's gross, or 0.4% year on year outperformance. I can go to you to give a bit more colour around the reasons why you would see performance loss.
Yeah, so I think prior to November last year, things had more or less been going along in the same direction for many years. Yields falling, broadly speaking, starting to turn up as expectations of inflation naturally rising, coming out of COVID. When we got to February, everything changed dramatically. Much stronger drivers of expectations of inflation as a result of the war in Ukraine, as a result of overhang supply constraints, blockages and so on, principally in China, not being freed up very quickly, COVID lingering, causing that to take much longer than anyone expected. And both those things together caused, let's say, central banks around the world to raise their fight against inflation by raising interest rates and raise the prospect of future interest rates and the extent of the aggressiveness of approach they might take in fighting inflation as well. And all that has caused markets to raise yields over the whole yield curve. And you can, in a couple of slides back, you can see some of those effects on the overall yield curve, quite dramatic in the past year. But that relationship between yields and prices is really quite profound, even at short durations. If there's any duration whatsoever, and this fund has a duration of around 3 years, so you multiply the change in yield by the duration, and you get a fall in price. So that's the negative headwind, if you like, of capital value. On your side, however, you have income still coming in as a positive. But the larger effect of the two has been the fall in capital value of the price of bonds, essentially. And that's what's driven the negative performance of both the market and the portfolio. Now, when you look at the chart that Alan Close have brought, it looks like the fund is tracking very, very closely. But we aim to perform better than the market index. That's what we really want to do. And suffice to say, until the beginning of this year, we've been doing that quite nicely. And in fact, that record was still going fairly well up until February, March this year. And then the headwind became really, really strong. The strongest element of that headwind in terms of its impact on the portfolio has come from something that was mentioned as well in the Alan Close section, was the fact that the index contains a fairly large weighting to what we call supranational bonds issued by multi-regional or multinational government-backed or sponsored agencies who issue bonds into the market. These are everything from the World Bank European Investment Bank, to multi-regional German banks, and the biggest of which is called KfW. They're government-like in nature because of the backing they have, and therefore they move very much like government bonds. So in times where there is seen to be a growing risk of a bit of a downturn in the economy, and there is now a big fear of recession, then you find that corporate bonds sell off relatively more than government bonds, while these supranational bonds behave like government bonds. Now, given that we have a very, very large, well, almost complete underweight exposure to those, and you can see that if you look at this table on the left-hand side of slide number 12. Near the bottom of the main section of the left-hand table, there is an entry called supranationals and agencies. The index weighting is 37.5%, and our weighting is 0.6%. Now, we don't hold them because they don't pay much income, and they generally perform like government bonds. And we would rather invest our money in corporates because they do pay higher rates of interest, because we like them over the medium to longer term much more. We don't just simply trust that they will pay out. We like to invest in bonds that give us a sense of security, but we don't just look and buy the highest quality bonds out there. They can be very expensive. Rather, we look to take a balanced view and say, how much of a risk-adjusted return can we get from looking around the market, buying the best bonds? Where we like to focus our attention is on that grade section of the left-hand table. All of those sectors there, covered bonds, they're backed by pools of mortgaged securities. They're essentially super senior secured bank-issued bonds, where we have a claim over assets ultimately. Real estate, a claim over assets. Social housing, a claim over assets or cash flows. Many of them are government protected in nature, let's call it. The ownership structure is slightly different. And structured bonds, where there are special purpose vehicles set up which issue bonds, and we have claims over assets within those structures. That emphasis on security gives us much more certainty that if the worst was to come to the worst and we were at default, those bonds would stand a much better chance of actually delivering the cash flows and ultimately the full repayments that you expect to get. So the headwind that we've had in relative performance terms has mostly been down to that underweight in supranationals versus true corporate credit. But be reassured that where we like to invest in corporate credit is much more emphasising security than the rest of the wider market.
Are you looking to just tough it out, or are you looking at changing the divisions in the portfolio?
So if you look at our portfolios over the long term, you'll actually find very small changes in the way that where we invest and the overweights and underweights that we take. We tend to be overweight the same secured sectors for long periods. We tend to be underweight the more economically sensitive sectors like consumer sectors, industrials, most of the time because they are sensitive to the economy. We'd rather not have that same degree of sensitivity. Where we do tend to be slightly overweight versus the benchmark outside of secured is in financials, and we may change that weighting relatively significantly depending on what attractive opportunities there are. Currently, there are attractive opportunities. We've seen the valuation of bank bonds, for example, in the market fall really quite rapidly. To us, that's an opportunity because banks are very well capitalised these days following the global financial crisis. And we think that that is an opportunity, so we've increased the weighting there. That's probably the most significant change we've seen if you look at the portfolio now versus, say, a year ago.
Okay, thank you. Thanks, you, and thank you, Richard. Just a couple of quick questions. Is there any exposure certainly in the banks and in the structured into Russian assets?
No.
That wasn't mentioned.
No.
And secondly, in relation to credit risk of the banks, it wasn't brought out in this profile on slide 12 what the credit ratings across the 39% you're overweight in the banking. Can we get that data sent through at a later stage?
Yeah. Sure.
Good. Any other questions, please? Thank you. Thank you very much. Anything else from your side? Good. A lot of information there, and thank you for your explanations of it. So we need to go to para 2.1 of the report, unless anybody else has got any other comments to make. So, we note the report and para 2.1, leadership team refer the report to full council. Is that the process? Yes. Is that agreed? Thank you. Okay, good. So can we now move to item A6? You know that's. You're very welcome to stay, but you can go and have some supper somewhere. Thank you very much indeed.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you. And we'll probably see you next year, will we? Or some. Thank you.
Bye-bye.
He's interested. Okay, I'm really conscious of time now. I was sort of allocated roughly 10 minutes to each item on the agenda, so my time has gone completely west to start with. Interesting, but I don't know how much of that we need. Maybe you two, but I don't know, we'll come back to that later. Perhaps there's a lot there to take. But there we go. So I'm going to suggest that we do put a little haste. We've got obviously to do it properly, but we'll put a little haste behind the future items on the agenda. So item 6. Draft annual accounts 21-22, which
I only got my
Yeah,
copies of that.
yeah.
I did.
Who we got this afternoon?
Okay. Can I just say, Chair, that
Yeah,
I'm really struggling. Most of us have jobs as well. Obviously, we make all the time we must for all our commitments here. But I am struggling a bit with getting papers late, and this was, I always look forward to this statement of accounts, either it, and I would have been doing that over the weekend if I had any time. So it is, I know I've been struggling, and then David, thank you. It's been, we're short of staff apparently, but it's just very, very difficult when we're trying to keep up with lots of different things. And this requires a lot of concentration. So I don't want to complain, I just want to say we really, really, really do need our papers early.
Yeah, could I make a general request that actually I think when you get this size of agenda, and I don't know what the agendas are enough time of year, actually this could come out as early as possible, even if it's just in drips and drabs, because it has, for me, it's been 3 solid days a week. And I just think if you're going to pay, you've all put the work in, we need to put the work in, but that there are only certain amounts of times when people have got time.
can we pick that up? They're both very valid comments, and I want to pick it up. If we do it at the end of the, because I think we need Emma, you were saying that this has been going. This is a sort of ongoing issue, and we need to find a way of. I appreciate this, all this stuff's coming in at different time, different departments. So we appreciate how difficult it is, but I think I found things coming in dribs and drabs and awkward to manage. My brain was hurting over the weekend on day 3 of this. So I think we need to find a way of improving it. It'll probably never be perfect, but we need to find a way of improving it because, in addition to this, I'm planning papers that deep to read over the weekend. So let's move on with the agenda. But we want to come back to it in the end because I think we need to address it. So can we move to item 6? Committee has requested to note the content of the 21-22 draft statement of accounts. These will be submitted to the council at external auditors on the 28th of June.
I suppose the timetable will shifted. These all get agreed at the December meeting.
Can we just get the presentation first, and then that might come. Who's going to present this?
I'll just take a couple of words for open, then I'm sure there's lots of questions. So it is the draft statement of accounts. They were published on the 28th of June on the council's website. The deadline and statutory deadlines have moved over the last couple of years with COVID. So the statutory deadline for publication is the end of July. So we were well ahead of that. So kind of well done to the team. So they were then passed directly to Grant Thornton, and our external audit process is already underway. So that will take place right throughout the summer. And so what you're seeing today is the draft accounts, similar to last year. See the draft accounts, we'll go through the audit process. There may be some amendments as a result of that, and then we'll bring back the final accounts to you in the October meeting. That's the intention. The statutory deadline for publication this year is the end of November. And we are expecting, I'll say, I'll caveat it, we are expecting at this stage absolutely to bring along final accounts October, well in time for you to kind of agree those before the statutory deadline. The accounts are quite a detailed document and absolutely picking up on your comments, Emma, and I know from kind of previous years you do go through them with a fine tooth comb. So anything that you want to pick up outside of the meeting, absolutely really happy with the meeting. And I know Livna's met with others as well. So I don't want you to feel like you've missed an opportunity to raise any questions that you've missed a chance. We will absolutely support you over the next few months. So they are published in a particular format and structure, and I know we had lots of questions about that last year. That structure is set down by the code. We're very limited on what we can do. One suggestion last year, which just wanted to draw your attention to, was that you were asking quite a lot of questions about narrative and context about council services. So what we've done this year, you don't normally receive the outturn report, which is at A7. That normally just goes to leadership team for approval, but we're just sharing it with you, not for discussion or kind of approval of this committee, but it just helps to, it presents the accounts, it prevents the outturn position in probably a more narrative format that allows you to kind of see where we're going with some of the services. So I will stop there and really open up for any questions, and Livna and Paul are here if there's anything specific.
Okay, in the limited amount of time you've had to read it, who would like to ask some questions? Anybody have questions to ask?
I've got so many, I will have a one-to-one with you.
Yeah,
if you don't mind. Even though it's all the fun, so
Yeah, I had a very helpful one-to-one with Livna just before this meeting, so
Right, okay.
answered a lot of my queries.
Just have a question.
Andrew's got his hand up, let me do it and then come back.
Okay, well, just a comment. These draft accounts, as a committee, we usually get a lot of our assurance by the external audit taking place and then exceptional reporting coming back to us. So by providing us draft accounts, helpful, but not so helpful in that it encourages us to read things twice. What I'm interested in is perhaps hearing from you and from Paul, what are the material changes from last year? What issues do you want to draw to our attention, rather than get all the way bottom up? Because I'm fully supportive of my colleagues. I've been saying the same to myself, to others. This is just too great a volume of information. So my question is, what are the material changes and material new judgments that have been made and that you would like our input on?
Great, so fine. I'll say a couple of words, Livna, you may well want to flag something as well. And I know it's early days with the audit, so we won't put you on the spot too much, but absolutely they are the draft. Interestingly, some authorities do bring drafts, some don't, but we think it's good practice. So absolutely take your comments about and get your assurance from the external audit. So if I could just draw my particular attention to draw you to, is on page 2 of the covering report, or page 24 of your pack. What I would say is that 21-22 was year 2 of the pandemic. What we did see generally in year 2, we saw some good recovery, and you'll see within the table that's set out under paragraph 3.7, we're starting to see some of the recovery of income losses that was very, very prominent in 2020, the year before 2020. So it's really good progress, I think, in terms of kind of the recovery process, and particularly kind of parking, slight recovery of the market, although that's taken longer than I think you've had from Treasury colleagues before. But that would be for me some of the real material differences. There are some, you'll see from that table as well, some big movements in terms of revaluation gains and revaluation losses. I don't think I'm kind of looking at now. That's not uncommon for kind of year-on-year movements. Some of that will be down to changing market conditions, and some of that will be for other reasons. That will all be subject to external valuation, so it is dependent on that advice that we provide. So that's probably the main areas that I would flag at quite a high level in terms of the key differences, I think, between 2021 and 22. But, is there anything like kind of the real specific details?
So for those who don't know, I'm the head of financial reporting and controls. But probably the single and most significant movement I'd like to draw your attention to is the net pension liability, which this year is an asset for us, and I believe one other council in London as well. And it's quite a significant asset. And I've put in our member briefing and in the cover reports some reasons behind that. The largest single reason being the increase in discount rate assumptions, and all of the financial assumptions that the actuarial firm that we uses for their accounting valuation. Again, it's quite prescriptive. It is they have to follow a certain set of rules under one of the international accounting standards, and the whole purpose of this valuation is to allow comparability across employers. So it is quite comparable across the board. It's I have put in the member briefing, which I also circulated just some illustrated for the last few years. So you can see it's quite volatile now, but does go up and down, and it is expected that we will be going down. But certainly, we won't have an asset that magnitude next year.
So, Ludna, are you satisfied with the assumptions? Because it's an arithmetic calculation. It's confusing to have these numbers in the accounts, which are different from assumptions and numbers in the triennial actuarial valuation, which actually sets the funding rate. So to some extent, this is an academic arithmetic exercise. We have to note, but I just would like reassurance and ask you, Paul, there's been no shading of numbers in an optimistic or pessimistic way to manipulate them. Kind of what I want to hear. These are the numbers that came out of the machine, based on reasonable assumptions.
So essentially, yes, and what our audit does is look to see whether what the council's independent expert has arrived at in terms of the assumptions and the numbers, that the numbers in the valuation report from the council's expert matches exactly what is in there. We have our own actuarial expert, and we also use, we compare the assumptions from the council's expert compared to our own expert to make sure that they're consistent, there's not great variation. Well, if there is, we seek to understand why. And we then audit the assumptions that are in there to ensure that they're reasonable, and B, they're being applied appropriately in terms of the reports there. So there's in terms of that particular question, that's exactly what the audit risk is focused on, that there hasn't been management manipulation of the assumptions. The fact that it's carried out by an external expert is some assurance to start with, because management is informed by the expert. And the fact that there were no changes then from the expert's reports to the figures in the accounts gives us further assurance, combined with our own expert who looks at general movements and trends and assumptions, and also gives their view in terms of what we should expect. It's in progress at the moment. I'd be surprised if we were to find that had happened, largely because of the nature of the process, but it is exactly the sort of assurance we then seek to give in our final report.
Oh, when somebody starts to answer with essentially yes, is that a yes?
It was essentially on the basis that we were in the process of ordering it and having concluded.
So, a couple of general questions. In 3.7 of the report, you talk about there's a 2 million Thames Water provision, an offset's been created. What's that? And then separately, I'd also like to understand what is so we talk about teachers' pension, which needs to be different, and I'm not understanding that. And then there is yes.
We'll come back to it.
Yes, certainly.
Who's going to do Thames Water in 1 minute without hesitation, repetition or deviation? I've been involved in this with my case study with resident. Who's going to do Thames Water?
There was a long-standing case which recently it went through all sorts of appeals, Southwark removing that brief. The outcome of it basically has been through all sorts of reviews and appeals. is that the council needs to provide for amounts on service charges that we've taken from leaseholders that we need to pay for as part of the arrangement we had with Thames Water for collecting water rates.
So this is the commission that's referred to expressly as commission that we can't take.
We are allowed a commission, but there's an element of it that we should not be taking. And so we've come up with some figures based on, I think it's up to 20.
This was a huge count. Many London councils were joined in on this. So,
and repayments have been made in,
Yes.
in most cases. In some cases, people move homes. We go it goes back to 2016, 17. So, but that refund process has been underway over the last year.
Okay, and then page 71, which is the teacher's pension and the employer's contributions. So, am I right in the report they talk of the fact that no longer does the council have to make its 19% contribution to pensions? But are they still responsible for teachers' pensions, or is that all through the schools payment that their pensions are funded? Because I didn't expect to see teachers' pensions in our annual report.
So this is a disclosure we need to make for it's the amounts that pay as contributions for teachers to teachers' pension scheme.
By the council.
They're by schools.
but we provide the money to the schools. Does it pass through us? Yeah.
Through budget shares.
And it will be through the dedicated schools grant as well, which is reported directly to the schools. And that the teachers' pension scheme is different to the local government pension scheme. And so it's a completely different scheme altogether. But if you've got some specific questions on the pensions, different pension schemes, we can certainly kind of run through those for you.
And then, very quick question.
Only got two.
Only two. One, why are you only doing a public inspection period to the 12th of August? Query whether it could be longer. And secondly, the phrase usable and unusable, I think it would be really helpful to actually explain that in the key, because it's not something that you find in, we have restricted and non-restricted in the charity where I am, but usable is not a term that we know usually.
I think just to answer that last part, within the narrative report, we do have some information around usable and usable reserves.
I think it would be great to flag it right at
as we find out.
Yeah.
It's a public document.
And in terms of the length of the inspection period,
30 working days is what they're told it is under the statutory rights.
But that must be a minimum.
It's fixed as a it's fixed as a 6-week period. It used to extend from the date the accounts were published until the date the opinion was signed, and when the audit commission was abolished and the local audit act replaced it, it was confined to 6 weeks, designed to ensure that if there were objections to the accounts from the public, it's not a never-ending process.
But it runs to October. Thank you.
Okay. Any other questions that you want to raise here, as opposed to submit, will be useful.
Chair, I've got a few questions, but I'll email them directly.
Okay. Nothing burning.
Mine have largely been answered.
Okay, lovely, thank you. In that case, then, can we go to? Thank you for that. As we say, there's lots of questions to do, and I think Andrew's point that it's the audited report really that's the really important one. So we need to come back to that. So can I direct your attention to paragraph 9.1? Recommend that the committee notes the content of the 2021 draft statement of accounts. And there's some issues there. So does the committee note the content?
Yeah.
Agreed. Thank you very much. Can we move on now to item number 7? Report by the Director of Financial Management, Audit and Transparency. Who's going to?
So Chair, I wasn't going to say an awful lot on this. This is the report I referred to when I introduced the last. So I didn't have anything specific, but it's more for your information that we committed to do that last year. So I wasn't going to raise anything in particular on this agenda.
I mean, the only thing that the only thing that really concerned me was the capital underspend in every category, and the fact that we got it down to 73 million when we had set a budget of 209 million, and then we're going up again for 2022 to 23 to 234 million. I mean, are we going to have another understand? You know, and throughout these documents in the external audit report, they refer to the need to sort of capital budgeting to get tighter, and I think also in the financial management 3 is also referred to there. There's clearly an issue with budgeting, and I just wondered what steps were being taken to address that, and is it reasonable to have those capital expenditures going forward?
So if I could come in on that particular one. So our capital underspend had been quite significant for a number of years. So I think in the 3 years that or 4 years it has been an underspend every year. We did carry out an external review probably 2.5 years ago now, and it's a combination of factors. I think there's an element of ambition. So there's an ambitious kind of capital programme, and there's an element of just lack of resources in terms of deliverability. So we've got some really big capital schemes in there. So we've acknowledged that, and if you go through previous outturn reports and quarterly monitoring reports, we have been talking about it for about 18 months now. There is a further piece of work that's underway in terms of the capital programme. 2 things really. One is we are reviewing the governance of the capital programme, and that is about really challenging every single scheme that's in the capital programme. And it's not just in terms of is it important, it's around where it is on deliverability. There are some schemes in our current programme that have been there prior to 2017. And we did some of that process last year, and there was quite a lot that came out for 22-23. But as you can see, the size of the programme we feel is still too large. So we are taking that forward again. That process is underway at the moment over the summer as part of our preparation for budget planning for next year. Our average deliverability each year is about 100 million. So you straight away look at the figures, and we can tell straight away that our capital programme is just too big still. So that's the process that's underway over the next couple of months. So our new programme, which will be published and agreed in March, we are expecting that to be much smaller. So that's the review that's going underway. We are also putting in place a small programme management type office to oversee the programme. You know, a programme of 600 million over 3 years requires some significant governance around it. So we're developing, sitting under housing and social investment, a programme management type approach to the capital programme. So I think we've got a really good handle on financially where the programme is, and we identify the figures. I think we've got a capacity issue with deliverability, and this comes back to not having a too ambitious capital programme that we can't deliver. But it's a combination of those different things that we are absolutely addressing as part of this year. So we would expect to see a much smaller programme coming forward in March.
I mean, I think that you've been on longer than me. I think since 2010 when I came, it's almost every year.
Yeah.
Some of it's to do with timing.
Yeah.
Some of it maybe is to do with ambition. But I just wonder how good we are at the project management side of these capital projects.
Yeah. And I think that's the second part. So I think we've got a really good handle on it financially where it is. It's the deliverability and the capacity to deliver and reporting and acknowledging that. So what we'll be doing going forward is nothing will go into the capital programme unless it is underpinned by a robust project plan that from almost agreement and governance right through to deliverability. So I wouldn't say that eliminates all slippage, Liz, but it would allow us to have a much tighter control on the capital.
Thank you. Yes, it kind of relates to what I was saying earlier about us losing money on money that we borrowed to actually realise. And I just wonder how much of this is a legacy pre-Grenfell, because the capital programme before we stopped all of that was actually insane. There were like 35, I did a count the other day for some work, 35 capital projects just on housing estates. It's just absolutely bonkers. So I wonder if that is part of it. And I don't know how. I mean, we've got procurement issues still, and we've been over and over this. I spent 2 painful years on procurement coming to produce that report, and we're still struggling with that. And the new homes programme, I know, is really struggling. And as I said earlier, the prices have gone up 20% because we were so slow to get them on the ground. And So we're still stuck with this. We're still stuck with the same problem, and project management, as we're saying, is still a problem. And you know, I know North Kent is going to get absolutely devastated when they hear that wretched tunnel under the railway up to White City of Latimer is being delayed once again, and some money from that is being borrowed and put somewhere else. You know, all of these things really matter. There are some, you know, the ambitions about like house or whatever, which is lovely, but there are also some which really matter to infrastructure issues. So I don't know how do we tackle this? How are we prioritising it? Because it's not coming to me, and I don't see if it's going through planning. I don't know, is it leadership who in charge of all this? Because, you know, I think we need to address it somehow.
So certainly on the Housing and Social Investment Committee, they are finding that actually things are coming in and they're 30% more expensive, and it's a mixture of Brexit and a mixture of COVID, also the delay factor. But for me, with all of this, and I very much said it when I was on the council last time, project management has to come first, because if a project goes off-piste in that first 6 months, you don't get it back. And actually, for me, I would push, particularly housing and social investment, to get that project management on board, because then they can look at the procurement and they go, do you know what, you're asking for a Rolls Royce. You actually only need a Mini, and maybe we can give it a paint job or some nice mirrors. But actually, we are too ambitious and too excited by our procurement exercise to actually get the project management team in first.
Well, I think there's something to be said for wanting the best, but I take the point here.
You can get very expensive units.
Paul, just out of interest, are we? You have this out of other boroughs. I mean, are we particularly bad at this, or is this common across boroughs?
You're certainly not the only council with repeated and recurring capital expense year on year. I wouldn't say that Kensington is particularly is an outlier in terms of the current.
That doesn't make any difference, but it's just reassuring.
I don't know. I'm not sure. I've got friends in council's chair, and I don't expect that.
Okay.
But yeah, we do have huge ambitions. I know. I understand that. I understand why, but I just think we've got to get it real. So I don't know how to get that.
This may be a subject where we do a deeper dive. So
Yes.
rather than worrying about
Yes.
lack of approval of invoices in the school, it'd be far more
Yeah.
interesting and impactful if we looked at some of the micro processes and controls of capital expenditure.
Maybe there's some joint work to be done with housing. So anyway,
Sorry, I was saying, and what I wasn't to suggest that when I say it's not an outlier, that therefore this isn't worthy of discussing. I think also it's worth adding that in terms of the actions the town outlined, whilst they're in an early stage and it's, the proof will be in the they're quite reassuring, and again, not all councils are taking as much action and recognise that the focus needs to be on the PMO and the project management stage of it, as in the outlines of the Taryn's, sorry, as in the end of the Taryn's outline.
Okay.
Chair, do you want me to come back on the prioritisation question?
Yes.
Just paper please, you know, it's one of them.
Why don't you prioritise these?
So you're absolutely right, and there are some schemes I think that were in there pre-2017 that haven't yet started. And so pre-2017, the capital programme was not funded by borrowing. Since 2017, obviously there's a borrowing requirement, and I'll just touch on that briefly in terms of the implications of that. But in terms of prioritisation, that review that I said we're doing over the summer will absolutely scrutinise line by line. And it is about challenging what's really important now. So we're now in a position with a 47 million budget gap that we can't afford to do everything. And we also can't afford to have the size of the program that we do. So that review and that prioritisation will happen over the summer. And the output of that will be published as part of the medium-term financial plans that get launched for consultation on the 9th of November. So there'll be an opportunity, so that will all be part of that budget process. So absolutely we'll be proposing, I imagine, schemes to either be removed or put into the capital programme. There'll be an opportunity for all members to be part of that consultation, either through scrutiny or through working with the opposition group as well.
But not until November, so it's all going to be roughly agreed by then.
No, it will be published for consultation on the 9th.
I know, I mean, but in political reality is that it's quite difficult for us to shift
But
Yes.
there will still be, there will be an opportunity, but absolutely, and we can kind of sit and go to it. Just on the borrowing, because I think that's really, it's important for the kind of this committee to be like, so we do have to budget borrowing costs. So when we set our budget and our capital programme in March, a significant element of that will be funded through borrowing. Now, we don't actually borrow until we need to, and you've heard that from the advisors in the first budget, but we have to budget for it. So what the knock-on effect is, you are budgeting for borrowing costs that you then know don't need to, and potentially making changes to services. So I think it was just helpful for the committee. So I talk about the implications of this all the time, and that's why it's so important that we get the right capital programme that is deliverable, because we can't afford to be budgeting any more borrowing costs that we don't need. Sorry, Chair.
No, that's very good. No, that's very important. Okay.
One question which you perhaps answer afterwards. Page 30, 58, 59. Looking at Grenville, I'm just puzzled why all bar one of the adjusted outturn figures equal the net budget.
And that is, just very quickly, the one-liner is because any underspends on the Grenville, that's a ring-fenced budget.
So I read that, so any underspends have been accrued.
Any underspends go into the Grenville reserve. The
And any
designated reserve.
overspends, don't they?
There was one overspend
There's one
on
of not
housing,
85.
yeah, but generally the underspends get transferred into the Grenville reserve. And because that's a ring-fenced budget, but the original 50 million.
Okay, it's sort of a strange table.
Yeah.
Okay.
Similar with public health as well, because that's another ring-fenced one that gets transferred to.
And sorry, excuse me, but what do you mean by the opposition group? I saw that also in the auditor's report. I didn't understand what the
Madam.
Oh, right, okay.
Actually, we've got two opposition
Sorry.
groups now, haven't we? So
Okay.
What?
we have two opposition groups now. When a party is more than two members,
Yeah.
it becomes a group.
I see.
So the Labour Group is obviously a group of forever and a day. Liberal Democrats now have increased their representation from 1 to 2 councillors.
Okay.
So they officially become a group. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, fine. Thank you.
Right, your report talks about pre-election, so I don't know, you either need to put a note to say this was on the 2nd of May.
Okay, good stuff. Can we then go please to we're just going to vote now, haven't we? Recommendations at para 2 on page 2 of the report. There's a series of recommendations here. Can we take them as one agreement, or do we need to go through each one?
This is the leadership team.
Well, this is for notes.
Yeah, so the leadership is asked too, so that we're going to ask them, are we happy with all of it? Can you just, possible inclusion of alone, just explain that?
So apologies, I picked up that as I was going through. So members will be aware that in the run-up to the public, so this did go to the leadership team on the 6th of July. Members will, and kind of independents will be aware that there was a conversation at council the week before in terms of support for Kensington Aldridge Academy to become a multi-academy trust. Get my terminology right, for Holland Park School. So that was my holding line. So I'm deeply apologise. That line shouldn't be in there, because in the financial outcome report, we published an addendum to the leadership team report. So I'll work with you, Callum, just to get that updated, and we'll refer directly to the leadership team report. So it didn't go up, but it went up as a separate addendum to the leadership team. So I'm so sorry, that line was my holding line. It should have been in there. And I noticed that there was a track change in there as well. So apologies on that.
Right, thank you. So the leadership is asked to, and we are going to ask them to do 2.1 to 2.10. Agreed? Agreed. Let's move to item Item 8, which is Internal Audit Annual Report. Paul, you're going to lead on this.
Yeah. So the reports in the appendix and cover the management responses to the recommendations within the report. As some of the audit is essentially, as all public sector audits, again in two halves. One is the financial statements audit that we just touched upon. The other is what is called within the code the value for money audit, and it's an audit of the arrangements in place corporately and how effective they are at securing value for money in the way that the council spends its money. 2021, and so this is for the audit year gone. 2021 was the first year of a new code, and what the new code did was widen the scope of the value for money work and widen the reporting requirements of external auditors, which is why this report has got quite a lot in it. Previously it was risk focused, it's still risk focused, but now there's a greater narrative element because it is designed as much for the public as it is for members. And to give a flavour from the auditor's perspective of what's happening at the council, and then obviously any views that we have in terms of the arrangements that are in place. The other change in the code, some of you will remember previously that the code required then a conclusion similar to an audit conclusion of either qualified or unqualified, and if qualified, the severity of qualification. That's been removed in favour of the narrative scope under the code. The thinking behind that being that actually you can't necessarily break down the totality of spending of more than $750 million into just a simple good bad rating, but actually for it to be meaningful, a greater narrative scope is more helpful to understand the council rather than just looking at the headline of pass or fail. There's a particular peculiarity within Kensington, of course, because since 2017, Grenfell has been a factor which meant that the predecessor auditors, Thornton, for 16, 17, 17, 18 were not able to issue their conclusion because it required that binary conclusion at the end of it. And because they hadn't issued it when we became the auditors from 1819, we also couldn't for 1819 and 1920. KPMG have now issued their qualification, and we've, in terms of the 2 missing years between when they finished and this report, and what we've asked for management is additional information in respect of those years to see the extent to which the qualification issues KPMG referred to were addressed, so that we can then form our view as to whether the VFM conclusions for those 2 years is qualified or unqualified. You may also remember that, however, that we've done all the rest of our work in respect of those years and already reported it to you, so it is now just a case in those years of finalising the conclusion of qualified or unqualified, depending on what had happened during those years to address the issues raised and highlighted by KPMG. The change of the code and the removal of the binary conclusion means that this report can now, though, however, be the complete final report for the VFM. And we refer to the ongoing inquiry and police investigation, but following a lot of discussion with regulators and the NEO in terms of, because it's a unique situation, we wanted to get to a position, as did the council, where we weren't building up or carrying on building up a huge backlog of unfinished reports because we're waiting for the outcome of the inquiry. And what we've agreed with them, which is why this report's come later than otherwise it would have done, to this committee, is a way of doing that which enables us to report fully to you, and also that should anything news from the inquiry, it can be dealt with in future years rather than having to revisit earlier years in terms of any particular outcomes, findings, either of the inquiry or investigation. So it's a very long-winded way of saying this report can stand in and of its own right, and the only key recommendation in there is almost a holding recommendation that says, as and when findings emerge, so obviously we'll respond to them and we'll consider the impact in future years. Otherwise, for this report, what the code requires is for us to identify or assess the arrangements across a wider scope, and to assess whether or not there are any significant deficiencies in the arrangements in place. For the 2021 year, we were of the view that what we've looked at, we haven't identified any significant deficiencies in terms of arrangements in place. To ask what would a significant deficiency be, and I don't mean to sort of damn the thing crazy here. It's a low bar, so you need to be significantly deficient in order for it to amend.
Go on, try again.
For example, examples of significant deficiencies could be, for example, that your medium-term financial plans just stuck up, or it could be that your governance arrangements are such that they become ineffective in enabling the council to conduct its business. So that's the worst form of I suppose finding, and our view is of the relatively high level of work that done across the totality of the spend and the arrangements, we've not identified any that would fall into that particular category. What we did identify were what the code calls improvement recommendations, and I think it's important to stress these are recommendations made within the context of arrangements that we consider fit for purpose, and it would, in our view, help the council on this continuous improvement journey move from fit for purpose to what more puts you practice in terms of arrangements in place. All of those have been discussed and agreed with management to arrive at this final position, and then the covering paper from management is their response, with information on what to do in response to those recommendations. We're comfortable with the responses that have been made and the direction of travel which has been taken. There's no one particular finding, I think, which stands out as an example of being particularly worse than any of the others. Most of them fall within the financial plans, and we've touched on some of them in terms of the capital programme and in terms of some of the risks which are present within all councils as well as London in terms of financial certainties and uncertainties to come in terms of the division. Because it's related to 2021, since being new and emerging risks which we've been covering in this year's BFM report, now we've got to the position with the regulators, we're hoping to be able to bring this year's report by the end of the year rather than being this time next year. I think such as the inflationary pressures which have come in since this was written. But overall, it's in my view, I think it's a positive report in terms of where the council is, the journey that it's taken since 2017, and some of the changes made. But just to stress, it doesn't seek to sort of preempt or prejudge the findings of any inquiry, or to say that therefore we think anything related to that is done and job done. Happy to take any questions on the reporting in detail in there. Should members wish to ask before moving on to the issues.
Yeah.
Question. One, you talk about whether members should be involved in exit packages. I was just wanting to understand the rationale behind that.
So it came from during the audit of the accounts. There was all councils often make payments to departing individuals, which come under a variety of sometimes it's redundancy, sometimes it's redundancy. There was one case this year where it was a particularly unique case, so and I'll go into details, specific detail. But it was a case whereby compromise agreement was reached. There wasn't full backing and documentation that had been made, and our view is that actually that should be strengthened. It was also because of the unique nature of the case. In our view, good practice would be that there's some element of member involvement in such a decision being made. But it's important to stress the policy of the council was that members weren't involved in a case of that size. So there was no breach of any of the policies in place, all of the arrangements in place. Our comment is on the policy as to whether the policy should, in relatively exceptional cases such as this, should it involve members' involvement. But it
was that seniority, and were you suggesting a lead member for finance, or what's the thought behind it?
So different councils got different measures. Some councils don't involve members in this sort of thing. Sometimes it can come back to bite them because then something becomes public and members are blindsided by an issue which one previously with them. Some councils take it to full council, some councils take it to the leader, some councils take it to portfolio lead. I think the particular arrangements depend on the council in place. It was a one-off. These aren't usual payments, but it is essentially whether the policy. Our view is that should the policy be tweaked to take account of any of these exceptional one-off situations, should they occur, not least to manage any public perceptions, should something like this become public knowledge, largely because they are in themselves contentious.
David or Taryn, where would that sit to get that decision or looked at first of all, whether we accept it or not, and then how we implement it?
I suppose, I mean, we've talked to colleagues in HR, we've talked to the lead member for finance. I think the other thing that, Paul, if I'm right, I think there's now, the government have introduced a cap on exit payments as well, so the specific circumstance which arose previously wouldn't happen now because of that cap that's been in place. I can also reassure the committee after that this was raised by the external auditor before, that I have actually reviewed exit payments that have been made in the last financial year, and there are no recurrences of that particular issue that Paul and the team identified through their work in the previous year. But we can take the question away in terms of how we might do that.
Yeah, I mean, when I looked at the accounts, we had 44 redundancies last year, and that the headcount increased by 102. The cost of exits was 2.1 million. So it's quite a lot to understand.
I think if you look back in our own minutes, we were chewing on some exit
arrangements. Yeah.
For certainly one individual.
Yes.
Yeah. For last.
So we can take away the
it needs looking at,
absolutely.
we'll see what decision it comes up with and where it sits.
Yeah.
That's the.
There is in place now an internal officer, it's called the adjudication panel. So all restructures, major staffing changes, including redundancies, go through that panel. But I think what the comment here is about the policy. So let's take that away. We'll take that away and discuss it with HR, and maybe bring back. Maybe if we track it in the action tracker, we can come back with an update at the next meeting. Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. I've got a question about recommendation 14. I don't know if that's about the council should ensure transformation programs are adequately supported by strong program management arrangements where external consultants are used. The council owns the change, such that change becomes embedded, etc. So I get that. I'm just wondering if this is this bit of a recurring problem there about our ambitions overriding our capacity. And this also applies to our capital program. So I'm just wondering who is in charge of pushing our transformation programs when we may. I mean, I have heard that in risk reports from some scrutiny as well. Yeah, I mean, I don't know who is actually in charge of those and who's maybe overreaching when we're not ready for that. We don't have that capacity to make them happen.
Yeah, I mean, you picked up. It's similar to the capital program, isn't it? That's a similar sort of. I suppose a couple of things to say on that. I think we are increasingly the way we work is much more cost cutting. So I think my first point is around there is so much now that we're doing that is cost cutting and has to have a natural program approach to it. I think our response to COVID is one. The new homes, where gone are the days where services are working in kind of a siloed operation where just they're solely responsible for something. So I think some of it is happening naturally. And I picked up on the paper that was written by the Chief Executive around Double Down, where he also talks about that quite extensively. What I would say is we've still got some way to go. There are some specific areas where I think it's in place. I picked up the transitions programme, which is a kind of our COVID recovery transformation programme. New Homes programme, I would say, has got that programme approach, and the capital programme at 3. But I think there is definitely something around how do we embed that in terms of our natural way of working. And that is something there's an action plan that will pull out of the Double Down paper about how we get that embedded into everything that we do. The only other thing that I would say is about kind of external consultants, which I think is one of the recommendations. And it's about how do we take some of the expertise that they bring into the organisation and how we embed it in our own staff, so it reduces the reliance on them. And again, I think we've still got a long way to go. It's an iterative process, but that is something that I do think we need to be pushing forward over the next.
So who is that? Whose remit is that? Is that the Chief Executive?
Picking up on, is there a single lead? I don't think there is. I'm kind of looking at
maybe that's an issue.
Yeah,
maybe that is a problem.
Yeah.
So I think the cost-cutting programme, transitions programme, Mike Curtis is the Exec Director for Resources, chairs that. Similar with the capital programme, I think Dan Hawthorne chairs the New Homes programme board as well. So there's at the Exec Director level, there's ownership there and oversight of the boards that are in place to take your point about that overarching piece.
Yeah, and the COVID recovery, obviously that involved a couple of leaders in particular areas. So there's no single lead, and I think the more we embed it as part of business as usual, there almost can't be one single lead because you want everybody across the organisation to be working in that manner.
But that's a slightly different, isn't it? There could be one single lead with everybody working in.
Silos.
Yeah. So who actually leads? Who leads the leaders?
Who's in charge of strategy and making it happen? That's a, I think that's something that we can start on.
So
I guess it's chief executive, isn't it? But I don't know how.
Yeah.
And the executive management team.
And the executive management team. So corporate strategy directly reports into the chief executive at the moment. Does everything come out of the corporate strategy team? I think that's where we come back to. It's almost it's part of everybody's responsibility that you won't make it.
But how do we get the frustration of this committee fed into that process? Because this is a recurring theme amongst 3 or 4 of our items on the agenda tonight, and I sense it's been a recurring item before, and
16 years.
before, let's leave it before, Emma.
I think on the piece that Mr. Luke suggested, about this deep dive, we can look to pick that up.
So we need to do it in conjunction with the senior chief executive, because nobody does come out with something that somebody else is doing something. And
can I make just an observation about this report? So I know life's all about progress. So it is progress in that we've got a pretty thick and densely written report, which I was trying to choose my words carefully. It's very executive. You make a point, you argue a bit against the point, then management argue against it, and you conclude things are more or less in the middle ground. Now, I'm interested perhaps in something a bit more pithy, where there's difference of opinion and where we're looking at the extremes, where there's needs improvement and then also recognition where things are very good. So what I'm missing from this report this year is it used to be that the council prided itself as being the exemplary financial control and controls. Brentford had a bit of a shock to the system, and so there's become I would say from an outsider's point of view, to some extent, palpable reduction in confidence. But there are still some things I think that are done very well, so I'd like to see those outliers. But I'd also like to not get into a very, processy production of an opinion, because what I'm interested in for you is where your opinion differs, where you've got some really hard-hitting points. So this may be very good for the executive, and maybe a good improvement, but I think it's missing something, and maybe I have to reflect how we can use a slightly different report from you to achieve what that's quite clumsily described.
Sure, no, and I think it's a good point. I think the way that it's written, I think possibly masks to an extent, because this was arrived at with several discussions I had with Barry and Mike in terms of the content and some of the recommendations, and it arrives at a position where we want to. Well, I mean, all auditors are naturally struggle to use words of praise because we're audited. But it's so there's almost where we've documented arrangements and it's not led to sort of recommendations for improvement. That is almost sort of by default arrangements that we're satisfied with and we think are doing well. And I take your point, there may be some exemplar arrangements that we could draw out further. But it is also, this is the end product, because it is also for public consumption of the precise process. And I appreciate that does mean, therefore, I suppose some of the earlier drafts aren't in front of the committee. But then that's
it's had some of the edge knocked off it, I suspect.
It's had the edge knocked off in the sense of, I mean, all the recommendations are where we've agreed. If there was a recommendation, sometimes we'll go with a recommendation and it's a bit punchier. And we know it's a bit punchier, but it's a bit like a negotiation in that sense. So where we arrive at, there's nothing we've arrived at that I personally am uncomfortable with, that it's been too much has been knocked off. And sometimes it comes down to wording. Sometimes we make the same point, but it's the way the wording is phrased. What we wouldn't want to do, I guess, is to present a report that suggests two opposing sides with an inability to come to a conclusion. if that were, and sometimes that does happen, but it happens in councils that are far less well run than Kensington, or far less reasonable in terms of accepting findings that are in there. And in that situation, then the committee has a role, because if there's a recommendation in here that we strongly believe in and the council refuses to accept, it's the committee's role then to either say, auditor, you're wrong, or management, you're wrong, go and accept the recommendation and go and give us an action plan for it. And that happens quite exceptionally in auditing in general, because that normally precedes a sort of breakdown of a relationship. And as much as we are independent from the council and independently appointed, essentially this is a report as much for the public as it is for members, it's also a report that arrives at a position where we haven't compromised below any particular standard that we want, and is the end product of that sort of back and forth rather than the, I suppose, the nuts and bolts of the volunteers that get us here.
Andrew, are you convinced?
Well, let's say this is chapter 1. We've got time, but I think you know the point of making, and I get what you're saying.
And I think actually there is a point in terms of some where arrangements are doing well, and I think that all auditors sometimes, this part, there may be more we can draw out in the positives as well as that.
And is it more about challenging us to be even better in a way?
Well, it's been out of fashion now, but world class, best in breed, all those things. It's gone seemingly.
Yeah.
And you're talking about good, and you talk about satisfactory and reasonable. I think we need to perhaps energise ourselves to aspire to something better. Looking hard to do that. Yes.
Good, thank you. Can I then draw the committee's attention to paragraph 3 and the recommendation there? Recommended the auditor and finance committee must give a notice to the report received, progress against the recommendation for 2002. Does the committee agree?
Yeah, I just had one thing, because your report has management comments.
Yes.
And we've got management comments here. These are largely blank.
Yes.
Are you going to put those management comments in? But then the key recommendation, we haven't got any management comments.
And the key recommendation is the one, essentially that sort of holding recommendation about the future inquiry. So I think that would be easy one to
Draft. Okay, that's all.
Can I just ask, in recommendation 10, sadly I was on long enough to know when the opposition party did put a full budget up, and actually the way the majority works, I think it's a really poor use of resources for officer time. But I do think pockets of proposals by opposition parties is useful. So I was actually quite disappointed by the council's response to this, and I felt that actually it should be challenged again, because with due respect, it's just, every officer you meet is everywhere already. So why when you've got particularly 2 oppositions now, do you want to have 2 full-blown budgets which will then actually be voted down by the resulting majority? So that was my take. Sorry,
We're always going to do opposition.
but not a full one. I mean, this is what it's saying. This is what it's saying. A full budget for the Liberal Party and yourselves just seems whereas usually you do in more recent years, I've seen you do pockets of changes where you put up alternative sections. This is saying footnote.
I'll see what we're going to do for next year.
Yeah, but
If the group wants to do a full budget, we will. We've got lots of new people. It's not just me.
no,
What you're making.
So the point I'm making is
We're
I don't think that's a useful response from the council that does talk about let's all work up 2 alternative full budgets on top of the one from the majority party.
Fine.
That's my
I would just add, from an officer perspective, we have a responsibility to be able to support the opposition in the same way that we do the leadership team. So we'll work with the opposition. But we usually start in autumn time and work that through. And you're right, up until now, it's been a handful of different proposals, but we must always, as officers, be prepared to support the opposition to develop an alternative budget.
Okay, thank you. Can we then move to recommendation of paragraph 3? Consider and note this report. Noted.
Yep.
Thank you. Can we then move to a slightly linked next item? Item number 9. Members are asked to note the content of the Grant Thornton External Audit Plan for 21-22 covering the Council and Pension Fund accounts. Paul, you again.
It is, thank you. So one of the, I think earlier in the discussion there was so interested in both council's view of what's changed in the accounts and what we as auditors are most focused on. This document sets out what we're most focused on in terms of the set of accounts that's in front of you. It's a very familiar format which existing members will recognise from previous years, and it sets out the most significant risks that we think are likely to lead to internal statement in the accounts should those risks crystallise. I'll take you through the key parts of the plan, and if we turn on the plan to page, actually, if you go to page 7, halfway down under materiality, it sets out what our materiality thresholds are. For the main council financial statements, it's 11.3 million, and for the pension fund, it is 14.8 million. Right. It's a simple calculation that's determined on the basis of the volume spent which the councils have. What it means is if there were an error in the accounts less than 11 million, it wouldn't prevent us issuing a qualified opinion. And you may think that's a lot of money. How on earth can an error of that size not lead to a qualification? And that is in the context of 770 million. It would mislead a reader. However, we would report to you everything that we consider non-trivial. So members, you will still see all of the issues that we identify over a trivial threshold, which is down at 600,000. And have an opportunity to require correction of accounts if you so wish to consider it more material than or management. Our audit is done within those materiality thresholds, and then from page 9 we look at what our significant risks are for the audit of the council's accounts and for the pension funds. There are 6 in total. The first 2, the risk of fraud in relation to revenue recognition and the risk of fraud related to expenditure recognition, are mandated for audits. That's not there because we think there's an issue at Kensington. Every single audit plan needs to address these. As far as Kensington is concerned, the risk of fraud, we believe, can be rebutted on the basis that the nature of the income streams doesn't lend itself to fraudulent recognition of them, unlike in a private business where you may have the incentive to under or overstate revenue depending on what fraudulent you suggest. Here, income largely grant taxation related with an element of fees and charges, and the use of reserves, meaning that the outcome is different in terms of it. So we were able to rebut those risks, but we do still do the full audit of income expenditure for the council. The risk of management override of controls is again a mandated risk, essentially looking at, and it's the points that are linked to the pension liability conversation, whereby management can alter the accounts by overriding the controls, largely through the use of journals or through the estimates and assumptions that they make within the financial statement. So we do specific work to ensure that that hasn't happened in terms of financial statements. The next 2, the valuation of land and buildings and the valuation of the pension fund's net liability, are significant risks with pretty much every single council audit, because these figures are massive, they are subjective, they are subject to estimates, and so we do a significant amount of work on those risks to ensure that a small error in both of those 2 could lead to a material mistake in the financial statements, just by their sheer size. And then the final 3, 2 of which are specific to Kensington this year. The completeness of provisions of contingent liabilities relates largely to potential liabilities that may arise from Grenfell. And so each year we discuss with management the critical judgments they've made as to whether a liability should be recognised or not. And we had a further discussion, I think this week, in terms of the latest position, and that will then feature in terms of management's judgments and what it is as recognised in the accounts. The valuation of the level 3 investments and the directly held property in the pension fund is due to, again, that's where the biggest risk lies in the pension fund. And then finally, a year-specific risk, which is the completeness and accuracy of data transferred in the move of the pension fund's data from Surrey in-house. And because it was a 1st of April transaction, we do additional work there to gain assurance that no errors or fraud leaked into that data transfer, and the arrangements that they're to safeguard the transfer of that data and the integrity of it. The next few pages then talk about there's increased work we need to do over the accounting estimates and judgments and disclosures. And the following paper actually, the management has set out some of their key judgments and disclosures in respect of that. The information is there for your information in terms of so you understand why we know how to do under regulations. Materiality I've covered, and then the remainder of the document sets out other work that we do, including the value for money. The risks on page 20, it's a very familiar set of areas of focus that we'll be looking at, and again, there's no significant weaknesses that our planning has identified that we haven't identified in the BFM report that we've included in our plan. So we're working on the presumption that at the planning stage, there are no new significant weaknesses that have been introduced to the arrangements in place at the council. Audit team and audit fees, which are then set out, and then other bits and bobs, which may or may not be useful in terms of some of the work that we do. Happy again to take questions in terms of the plan or the work that we've done to date in terms of all plans we now
Any questions on that, please?
I've just got a small one. Okay.
Lisa?
It was on the audit fees. I mean, the council audit is virtually flat.
Yeah.
The pension fund audit goes up by about 10%. I just wondered why.
largely because of the council audit. There's if you take last year's fee to this year's fee, it looks like it's just moved small amount. There are elements in last year's actual fee which won't be part of this year's audit, and then new elements in this year's audit which bring it up again, and they largely net out. One of those is the additional work on the transfer of the data in terms of the pension fund, which affects both the main council and the pension fund. In the council audit, that's largely netted off by something else that's appearing. In the pension fund, it's just straight in.
Just two comments. One about fees. I've quite just been minded how your fees have changed since your appointment.
Yes.
So they seem to be larger, a lot larger now than they were 5 years ago. But
yes.
Yes, you're saying yes.
Yes.
All audit fees
yeah,
have gone up across the market.
But the history was that public sector body was putting that large overhead on top of the actual fees incurred. That disappeared when we got rid of the public body. It seems to have crept up again, that's all. So the savings we made disappeared. I'd just be interested to know. And just second thing is, do you have a good look through our strategic risk register just to make sure that there's a pick up of any financial stroke accounting risks from what are broader risks?
Yes, so if I take the second point first, we do exactly that. So we go through the risk register as part of our planning. We've already done that work this year. We're looking to see whether or not the risks that we expect to see in there are in there, and they by and large are. And we're also then looking to see whether are there risks in there that we haven't spotted that we should add into our work. And again, there's nothing which is in there which wasn't already in our plan. But we do that check in both ways as part of our planning. In terms of the fees, they have gone up. Last year, so the scale fee is set by PSAA. They've gone up for a combination of reasons, most of which is just increased regulatory requirements in terms of what's needed. So the amount of work we now need to do on the fixed assets is significantly more than it used to be, because the FRC was saying to us, well, if you don't do that work, the audit's deficient, and it differed from what the expectations and assumptions on the scale fee. And government have recognised that, and so all councils have received additional funding to offset the cost. So the actual cost is, whilst that is the cost, there's also additional funding the council now receives to pay for the increased costs.
Thank you. Can I just, it's a general comment, and a lot of the responses to the risk are quite woolly and vague, incredibly evaluate, engage, test, update.
We're getting into the swing of things.
Kind here, but they are pretty woolly. Am I being unkind or?
No, it's probably the word I used.
What, woolly or evaluate?
No, it is partly because it's written. So when our work gets assessed by the regulator, whilst they aren't necessarily well, layman's terms, or in a way that it says precisely what we're going to do factually, they're written in a way that means that the regulator, if the regulator says, have you done this, we can demonstrate you have, because it flows through the language and the regulatory requirements of the audit.
It shows we've evaluated it, we've assessed it, but so what? What have we done with it? What happened to it?
So we evaluate to assess whether or not what has happened has led to the accounts being materially exceeded. And so in doing the evaluations and the assessments, we then, and the validations and verifications, we then...
Feeling a bit like yes, Minister, but carry on.
We then have the assurance as to whether or not, if you're saying you spent 760 million this year, doing these evaluations and assessments, give us the evidence within an 11 million, by the way, did you actually spend that? And did you spend it on what you say you spent it on? Is essentially what it is. But if you put it like that in the plan, the regulator would say, well, you haven't, ironically would say, you've failed to communicate to those charged with governance precisely what you did.
Okay.
When the grant for Lawton appointed and for how long?
So we were appointed because the council opted into the PSAA programme. So our first audit year was 18-19, and it's a 5-year appointment. But the appointments extension then is with PSAA, so the council's opted in since. So PSAA has just undertaken its most recent procurement of audit suppliers for the market, and then identified as a process they do and identify whether.
Sorry, what does PSSA stand?
Sorry, that's the public sector audit appointments. It's essentially the people who used to work at the audit commission body that was abolished, PSAA, under the auspices of the local government authority, not authority, association.
I think all but a handful of authorities actually procure their externals through that route.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Just one quick question. On page 22, the audit fee for Kenton and Shuffy, the subsidiary. I saw in the accounts that we've got a number of subsidiaries that seem to be dormant or not trading that will be closed down. I don't recall seeing this company in the accounts. Can someone direct me to where it is in the accounts?
No, you're right, it wasn't there.
It wasn't there.
No, but I assume that's Notting Dale is there.
Notting Dale is there, but I was told it was dormant and was going to be struck off the register and already applied. But this is a company with an audit fee that's been there for the last 2 years, which I can see in the account.
And repair direct will remain all the time that the public inquiry is underway. Is it listed
It's
on
on page 55 under related party transactions.
It's a subsidiary.
Yeah.
55 of the account.
Sorry,
of the account.
sorry.
Actually, that's the dormant ones, but yeah.
Okay.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Can we then move to para 7 recommendations? Review the report and grant quantum on informing the audit risk assessment. Any further comments? We reviewed it. Reviewed it. Thank you. Move on to item A10.
So this document, as I said, is we asked of management a large number of inquiries as part of our planning process, and we also previously used to ask in the sort of written form members of this committee and the chair of the committee some related questions. What we've done this year, partly to show you the sort of responses we get from management, and also because then response from those charged with governance is more integrated into response. We show you management's responses. So you make inquiries to management across a wide variety of areas, the contents I set that in the context page. And these are management responses in terms of high level arrangements in place, and it includes key accounting estimates and judgments that management bring the accounts together. I don't propose to go through each of these. The process is then, as those starts with governance, you have the opportunity to read those responses. By and large, hopefully, you agree with them and you recognise what management's saying, because it's also your understanding of how the council operates. If you've got any further thoughts or disagreements with those, you can receive those collected in 5 minutes. And then that further informs all the work that we do. So, for example, if I've never had this happen ever, but should you come back and say, well, actually, this is completely not what happens, and management is telling porkies, clearly that would change the approach that you're taking to certain part of the audit. But by and large, these responses are consistent with our existing understanding of counselling methods in place at a relatively high level, and also consistent when we drill down further in previous year's audits, consistent with what happens and what we expect to find this year. The purpose of this paper then is for any further comments you may have over what management has said in particular arrangements, or that you think we should be informed of
Page 158, management's response was that there were no reported items of fraud. We've got papers here which actually, we've actually got a fraud report. There were quite a few instances of fraud, so I don't think management can really say there were no instances of fraud. They may want to say there were no instances of material fraud, but I don't think you can say there were no instances of fraud.
So I think is that item 9 that relates to the pension fund specifically.
Have any of Royal Borough of Kensington, Chelsea, and pension funds it's both.
The pension fund service providers.
They're linked to the effect on the financial statements.
Yes.
Rather than the specific issue that is in a first report. I think that's the distinction, isn't it? Particularly related to any impact on the financial statement.
Because we do cover elsewhere what's reported to this committee in terms of the outcomes on fraud investigations, so that is included in the response as well.
Anything we need to add? Any questions you don't understand? Any?
I thought one response I thought was included with 164, item 12, and then I have to admit, on one page 159, you need to understand how the Audit Transparency Committee oversees the processes. I wasn't party to this report March 2021, and I didn't know whether it might be worth sharing it. Which is page 180, which is how the Audit and Transparency Committee has provided the assurance that the arrangement for the accounting estimates are adequate. I kind of came away with this going, it all feels very weird.
Well, how much did it cost, by the way?
Well,
there's that. How much did it cost? It's 20 pages again, densely printed, erudite words.
It is.
You're probably getting a bit of feedback, not so much value from it.
So, I mean, cost-wise, this is all built into the audit fee. I think, I mean, so previously we'd send a separate request to the chair of the audit committee, who would respond on behalf of the audit committee in terms of the committee's oversight of the arrangements in place. Personally, I think both processes work in that sense. Are we getting value from this? I think yes, unless you're in so, for example, you're not identifying any major errors or inconsistencies with your own knowledge of how the council's work is value in that the negative is positive in that sense, because what it's looking for is it doesn't necessarily need this committee to add significant extra to this in order to add value. The value is that you've considered it, and if your views are, there may be a few points to pick up, but by and large it's consistent with your knowledge, then that's what we're looking for in terms of this.
I think it's insurance for yourself.
Andrew, if you lend me a watch, I'll tell you the time. Okay, should we then move to item paragraph 7, sorry, recommendations, review the report? Any further comments? Agreed, move on. Give item Evan.
If you have no more.
Yeah, sorry, yes, Derek, I was thinking about it then. Yeah, thank you very much. Thank you for being with us and answering the questions. I'm sure we'll see you again. Great, thank you very much. Thank you.
Thanks, Paul.
Item 11, report by the Shared Services Director for Audit, Fraud Risk and Insurance.
Thank you, Chair. I'm David Hughes, and welcome to the new members of the committee this evening. So we bring to the committee the strategic risk register that the council maintains. So that's something that is maintained within my team, but the executive management team at council, that's the chief executive and the executive directors, review every 2 months. We then bring that to the committee for your consideration, and part of that consideration is getting assurance, as we've been talking in external audit, about the right risks are actually appearing there that you expect to see there, and that the mitigations for those risks are reasonable in terms of what we'd expect to see. It would recognise actually that a couple of things in terms of the history of this strategic register. One is that when it was established sort of 3 years ago, Barry Quirk, the chief executive, was very clear that unlike many council risk registers, it doesn't focus on inward-looking risks, reputational risks. It focuses on resident risks. That's the intention, to look at the impact of risks on residents. That's something we've been clearly seeking to do over that 3-year period. I think it's also, to note that actually that these risks are typically inherently high. They don't change significantly in terms of their scores over time because they are significant risks the council faces. We operate, as is common across the sector, a 5 by 5 scoring approach in terms of impact and likelihood. So 5 being high in terms of impact and likelihood, making sure that we're assessing those scores every 2 months. Now, at the last committee, we did take some feedback about looking at how we might not only provide a sort of a more summarised register and provide the details. So we're working on some examples of that to share with committee members, so that when we come next time, we can see, we can share with you some examples to see which ones would work for you best. But for now, we've kept the same format. What we'd like to get from this evening is just some any comments you have on the register itself, but actually importantly, using the register to ask executive directors and directors to come and give you more detailed reports on how individual risks are being managed from the register. So again, you get that better insight into those particular risks that you're particularly concerned about in the register and how they're being managed. So I'm happy to pause there and to take any questions.
Can you just the target score there? Who sets that target score?
So that's set initially by the executive director whose area the risk is in, and then it's agreed by the executive management team.
Which is good, well exceeding them all, but that depends on how effective your target setting is.
It is.
So we're slightly marking our own homework here, aren't we?
There is that extent to it, absolutely. And I know that's again where the role of the committee comes in to ask the challenging questions where you think that those targets are ambitious enough or they're not what you'd expect them to be. I know we've had conversations in the past around the timescales for which those actions.
And it's linked to the appetite for risk, which is written down somewhere. It's very difficult to find out.
Yes.
Yeah. Thank you. The two I'm particularly concerned about is number 1, which is the contribution of housing, emotional and psychological needs for the persons of the Tower and Walk. And I've had several conversations with Callum Wilson, and I know people are working incredibly hard, but it's bad out there. It's really tough out there, and I don't know how we're going to consider that. The other one is the number 13, which is the fragility of the local care market.
Yes.
Much COVID, which I know is a disaster in the making. How we're going to get through the winter with such shortage of care workers in care homes and home care. I have no idea. So those two,
On
They're
the
both like
second,
social care issues.
on the second one, that we've added some, some increased sort of pressures that are coming down the line in terms of the increases that will come around to the national minimum wage and living wage because of inflation. That's actually going to really put pressure on the contracts we have with current providers in terms of the rates paid they need to pay to their staff and managing that within the contracts that we have with them. So there are some real
And that's the only
pressures
way
coming
they
down
can
the line. Yeah.
retain staff and train.
Yeah. So happy that that certainly would be happy if the committee would like that as a pay.
I'm just going to suggest at the end that we take one of these headings every meeting and really deep dive into it.
I actually think it needs, I don't look at it as a strategic risk register. I think the risks detailed here are they're very detailed. And I would actually like to see more operational risks, not just external risks. These are quite specific. To me, this doesn't look like a strategic risk register. These are sub-objectives within that strategic risk register, but you need to have some high-level risks. And then we made comments at the last meeting that we'd like to see, how that risk has changed over time, and and also I think any risk registers I've seen, you have a high-level summary at the front, and which actually puts the scores, and then these are the detailed points below. I don't think this is a strategic risk register, and I would like to see some work on it.
We'll take away, and then we'll come back to you and colleagues to have that conversation.
Can I just ask, I've not come across something where you multiply the impact by the likelihood. What's the driver behind that? So you get the total score.
It's a means of scoring comparing risks. So again, it's looking at if you've got a basket of risks, how do you prioritise or also look at those risks in terms of the ones you want to focus most on. And
so you've picked these out of a pool of how many in order to, so you've picked up all the ones that are 15 or above, is that right?
Not strictly, no. So we have departmental risk registers, which again, the operational risk registers. And what the discussions at EMT are about, which ones of those risks merit being on the strategic register. So we started off with about a dozen or so risks 3 years ago, some of which are still on here because the long-term sort of impacts of them. There are a number of new risks that have been added on in the time that committee members will know. So we can provide some information about how that's changed over time.
And then is there a scoring profile to provide commonality? Because otherwise, if I'm running a service and I don't want to be on the central risk register, I may, put one of these down a peg in order that I miss the threshold. So is there either peer review or is there this is how it's graded and this is the grading rules for all departments?
So we have guidance which sets out those grading rules for departments, and then actually go around to the directorate management teams to have conversations with them about their risk registers to spot those examples actually where you say where either risks are being downplayed or sometimes actually risks are being played up because there might be a desire to get some more funding in a particular area. So you see examples of both sorts. So we do have those conversations to test and check at a directorate level, and then the conversation at EMT level for the whole of EMT to consider which of those risks and what the scoring for those risks and the mitigations needs to be. So I think it's quite, and then this is where we bring it here to then have that further conversation about your oversight of it and what your views are to feed those back into the process.
It's quite difficult, David, without knowing the details of the business groups that have brought these forward.
Yes,
that would be
right. Okay. Yeah.
On risk number 14, have we, probably too early, but I'd like to come back at some stage. Have we learned anything from the extreme heat last week that we need to reflect on in the risk register? Because it was put to test, wasn't it, last week? In terms of our residents, in terms of how we run the council, staff coming in, etc.
So actually, so Tara and I are both involved in emergency response last weekend. You might recall I suddenly picked up the flooding last July. So I'm booking next July off. But as we did with the flooding last July, we're doing a lessons learned piece with emergency planning colleagues. So what we can do is then bring a report back that highlights to you the learning from how that worked, but also the learning from it, as you say, in terms of making sure the council services were maintained, what was done in terms of impact on residents, how we manage the situation. So that's something happy to.
And I guess if who knows, it's going to be a regular, goodness, yes, again going
indeed,
forward.
yeah.
Are there any changes? That
Which
need
is
to
what
be-
the lessons learned piece
Yeah.
that we're doing in the college is there for.
I think, Chairman, it's very interesting what David said at the start, that Barry had over time changed this in a way that probably hasn't been articulated at this group before, but it kind of explains why it's got a little bit more specific than it started out. And it maybe new eyes on this, new thoughts. Going to have a new chief exec, I think maybe good time to have another look at this.
Yeah.
Because we've come at it trying to nudge it in
And it
terms
needs
of
to be, it
yeah.
needs to be changed.
Okay, so I'm going to ask if you do want at each meeting to do a deep dive in a particular risk.
I think it's a good idea.
And which would you like to kick off with? Emma's brought up a particular imminent one.
But if we're going to have a revamp of it, and they're going to bring a revamp back to October, I think we need to look at the revamped risk register then.
I think, Chair, a number of the risks will remain. So I think the example of the fertility care market, the impact of climate change are things that I would suspect would still be there, but happy to take the committee's steer. So whether you want to wait until after we've revamped the register before you choose something.
Will we be scheduling a deep dive between now and October?
So the intention would be we take that away.
Yeah.
To scope.
So we decide which we want to deep dive on. The officers then prepare that for us to do at our next meeting.
At October,
Yeah.
even though we're going to be revamping the register.
But are we going to be revamping it, or are we?
I think revamping we were talking about.
I think I'd like to explore that with you in more detail outside the meeting.
Revamping is a huge bit of work, really, isn't it? And it may be needed. I'm not saying it's not needed, but that's quite a chunky bit of work. And there are some of these risks
to think about how to change it, but also the deep dive is as much about getting some people who are responsible for managing the risks to hear how well they understand their risks and how they're mitigating. And you can soon tell whether they've been filling in a form or they've thought properly through it. So I would say we could do both. One is a longer.
So which Emma, are you putting a bid in for the?
I'm very concerned about the care market.
Yeah.
Very.
And we know that's been an issue in the past.
It's really stuck with this. We got, I don't know, 1,500 vacancies.
Yeah.
For home care. I mean, they're all using agencies, which is costing us more. That's it, and well, they're doing no rubbish, and not being trained. It is a glorious mess, actually. It really is a mess, and that's.
So that'll be a good one. And in doing that, we can then assess how realistic officers are in assessing risk and using that as an isolated case study for examining that aspect as well. Okay, fine. Thank you. Sydney, good question.
Very quick question. Page 195, under prevent on the right hand side, it says that funding is reduced from the Home Office, I think, down to 0 in 2020 and 25. What's our plan to tackle that gap in relation to prevention of radicalisation?
So actually that was a topic of debate at the MT the other week. So there are plans that are currently being considered by officers in the environment communities where that's based. So I can bring an update back for you on that as well. Yeah.
I've got some other questions, but I'll email them to you.
Perfect. Thank you.
The recommendation at Para 2, working to review and consider the strategic risk register, identify specific risks for more detailed consideration in the future. Agreed? Agreed. Good. 8.12, I'm going to keep it moving a bit swiftly now. I failed miserably in my first meeting, I'm sorry. I'll keep it that.
You're getting hungry.
8.12. Report from the Director of Financial Management compliance with SIPCA Financial Management Code. Who's going to lead us on this? You are.
A few words.
Thank you.
So, thank you. So for that, and we touched on a couple of the issues actually. There's definitely some consistency between a couple of the articles. So the Financial Management Code was first launched in 2019. All councils were given almost a test year, if I can call that, to prepare to look at their compliance by. We needed to be able to demonstrate that we were compliant with the new code by March 2021. So we brought a first report to the committee. For those of you that were here at the time, we brought it back in June 2021. At the time, demonstrated obviously compliance with the code, but there were certainly some areas for improvement. The code is now fully operational. There is a requirement by the 31st of March to demonstrate not just that you are compliant, but you'll see that there's a full report that follows. We have to be able to evidence that. And that is something that Paul and his team will be looking at as part of the external audit. How we've gone about the evidence, we've run workshops across the organisation. So the financial management code can't just be my responsibility, or it's an organisational responsibility about kind of how we embed good financial management. So we've done a series of workshops, we've done lots of interviews with individuals, so that absolutely when we say that we're compliant, we can provide the evidence which Paul will be looking for when he does external audit. The 6 principles which are set out in the report and 17 standards, I can report that we are fully compliant in terms of the basic compliance levels. However, there is always room for improvement, and I think some of the areas for improvement we picked up as we've gone through. The ones that I would like to particularly pick out is we need to improve our ability at carrying out options appraisal. So for any decision making, we should absolutely be comparing all of the options, and linked to that, particularly in terms of financial management, is making sure that we, with all the uncertainty that we're living with, that we get into a much more integrated approach to scenario planning. It is going to be impossible for us to live without uncertainty over the next 2 years. So scenario planning has to become an integral part of what we do. So those are the two. Financial planning, at the moment, we look at it over a 3-year period. We will be extending that to over a 4-year period, particularly to align with the new council plan. But capital, which we've touched on a little bit today, looking at that over a 10-year period. Now, the further you get into advance, it's really difficult to predict budgets with that sort of accuracy. But the principle about having a 10-year planning period is for capital investment, we should be looking much further afield than just 3 years. So those are the kind of the main areas. There will always be room for improvement in terms of embedding good financial management across all services. I think we're in a good position in Kensington, but there is still work that we want to do in terms of that accountability and ownership. Financial management can't be finance responsibility to everyone. So that will be an area that we will always be working towards. So that's really in a nutshell. Those are probably the 4 or 5 key areas that I would say are areas of improvement. It has come as a separate report to you. It's probably the last time it will come as a separate report. What you'll see in future years, the code hasn't disappeared. What you'll see in future years, it will be an integral part of that annual governance statement. So it is referred to in there, but given the significance of it, we wanted to bring it as a separate report. But going forward, it will just be part of the statement. And that's all I'd like to say, Chair.
Arrow 1.3. Compliance with the code is a collective responsibility of elected members to you. What do we do? So we are some of the elected members, but we're not all. What is the work going on scrutiny committees to pick those and train? What's the...
So that comes in a variety of forms. So induction for new members. So I will be part of that induction process over the next 6 months. I think we've got a training session coming up. That is around accountability and ownership by lead members for their portfolios and making sure that they understand that. It's all of the work that I do with Overview and Scrutiny Committee, particularly in the run-up to the budget, so October to March. The work that I do with the oppositions, I should say, all of that is in terms of the work that we do. So it's about members understanding the council's financial position and understanding some of the challenges of how we're going to address it. So that those are just a kind of a snapshot. So there are almost different ways of working with different sets of members.
Any other questions?
Just ask, as a new member, along with Sydney, there's a lot of reference to Kroll. Could we have the Kroll report and anything that the audit committee received as papers in the past, just so that we can get ourselves up to speed?
Indeed, yes. So what I'll happily do after the meeting is share the Kroll report itself and also the paper the Chief Executive provided and presented to the committee in terms of the recommendations and actions he was taking as a result of Kroll review. You'll notice on the forward plan that London Park and the Monitoring Office will be coming back with a report on our review of arrangements, an annual review, which is all the recommendations that Barry made in his report. Happy to circulate those to you after the meeting.
Yeah, sorry, is my understanding correct? Appendix 3 focuses on Principle F and what is listed on Principle F on financial management. And then what I didn't understand is why that wasn't carried forward into Appendix 4, those headings. I just got a bit confused.
Now I'm doubting myself actually.
Page 229, page 231.
So appendix 3. So I can't explain. So how the FM code. Where we want to get to is that the financial management code fits into our wider governance principles. So F is just. So I'll work back. So in terms of Appendix 4, those are each of the 17 standards within the financial management code that we have to reference. So that's the clear evidence base there. But Appendix 3 refers to wider governance. I'm not saying that very well.
It's not. It's managing risks performance through internal control and strong public financial management. It's just one of them. It's FM. It's financial management. If you look at the chart.
So if you, on page 216, on page 216, this is the wider governance code, the local code, rather than the financial management code.
Yeah.
And what we're saying is that how the financial management code fits into the wider governance is through that particular category F. And Appendix 3 is category F. It's not just around the financial management code, it's around the overall category F in terms of governance and the local code. I'm not explaining that very well.
I'm confused.
But I know we were talking about
Can we get
Let me do your written response.
Yeah.
That's really easy to actually upfront. I think I know what I mean, but I'm not saying it.
any other questions, or can we move to the recommendation? On paragraph 7, committee note, comment on the report and the main website. Complies with financial management code through the annual governance statement and in line with the council's local code of corporate governance. Committee note, noted. Thank you very much. Can we move now to swiftly moving on? 8:13.
That's me.
A report by the Shared Services Director for Audit, Fraud, Risk and Insurance. That's a long business card.
Yes. I'll hand over to Maura Mackey, who's my head of internal audit, with a much shorter title.
Yes, a lot easier.
Great, fine, thank you.
So, thank you, Chair. This, normally when we come to the committee, we bring progress reports of what audit we've been doing, what follow-up work we've been doing. You've come into the tail end, unfortunately, because this is the annual summary of what we did from last year's audit plan. But it's really important because it kind of helps to shape the conversation and what goes into the annual government statement, which is part of the accounts. So it is useful that it comes to this meeting. So those of you who were members last year will recall that we have a fairly flexible audit plan. So we present an audit plan to the committee in February, March time, which is quite high level. There's certain things which we will always look at during a particular year, but the rest of the plan is really built up from conversations we have with the directors. We meet with the directors every quarter because risks change, priorities change. So the plan evolves during the year, and we try to keep you informed if something's changed, something we plan to do has now changed. But generally speaking, it's quite agile. What this report does is it brings you to a sort of overarching view on the work that we've done. And if I take you to the Appendix 1, that summarises everything that we've completed within the year, which has helped to form our opinion. So some of these things would have been reported previously at previous committees, which not all of you would have been at, I'm afraid, but you can obviously go back and check there, but we give a little bit more detail in our progress reports about specific audits. There's quite a few things that have closed down in July for this committee, report to this committee. I've given a very, very brief
progress report as an appendix because I didn't want this report to be too lengthy. But obviously, I'm quite happy to sort of give you any additional information on any particular area if you're interested. Just wanted to point out that we don't just get our assurance opinion from the audit work we do. We do take into account areas where we provided advisory support. Although it's where we are aware where maybe something's changing, maybe the process is changing, the service is changing, and there have been well, it could be anything. We are sometimes asked to contribute to that, to maybe cast an eye over what they're planning, because it's better to get it right from the beginning than for us to go back in later and criticise them for getting it wrong. We will go back later independently, but just to show you that we sort of look quite wide at what we put into our opinion. And of course, on top of that, there are other sources of assurance that we can get through, for example, Ofsted reviews, which has been one recently. So this kind of tries to pull together our thinking so that we can then give you an opinion on the controls, risks and governance for the council in the year in question, which then feeds into managed governance statement. I wasn't going to say much more than that. Obviously, happy to take any questions on any specifics.
Where, for example, you find that they haven't followed a particular policy, for example, HR recruitment, do you then, or does HR then roll out a reminder of the training and the policy? Do we go bigger rather than just...
So it would depend on what we're looking at, but if it's a specific departmental area, then it's for them to share with they need to update what they're doing and share with their team. If it's wider than that, we would ask, for example, somewhere like comms, through possibly HR, to go out to everybody to say you need to remember. And this happens quite often with you need to remember to book your sickness on the system so that they're properly capturing sickness data. And I think it's other examples where we get these comms to remind us to do things. If somebody's not closing orders off the system so that it's showing it open on the commitment system, we get things occasionally saying, please remember to go in and close your orders once they're complete. So yeah, there are ways of doing that.
I think we do use the word to inform council-wide policy as well. So if we find a particular issue in an area that warrants applying, changing the policy across the piece, we would recommend that to the relevant director as well. So we do pick up those wider pieces.
Just ask me, a quick question comes back to strategic risk registers. As the internal audit function who are sort of inward looking, trying to understand risks, do you yourselves have a list of what you would call internal risks, which you then leads to your work plan?
Yeah.
If that document, whatever that document looked like, will of course be focusing on the key risks in the existing function.
Yeah, we have what we call our strategic plan, which is informed. There are certain risks, no matter.
Is that shared with the audit committee?
Yes, I think
it is. When we bring the audit plan, we send you the one for the year we're now in. Yeah. And you'll have it again in February, March.
So that informs, I said that some audits we need to do, because there's some specific risks that we have to accept and we have to review them. So in that, it gives us an indication of how frequently we should look at certain areas, for example. So it's in our strategic plan.
Thank you. Would it be possible, forgive me if I'm missing it somewhere, the assurance levels, advisory, satisfactory, limited, I don't really know what they mean.
So if I have to pick it. So we have 4 levels of assurance for an individual audit. So you start off the top with substantial, where there is very little, if anything, wrong at all in terms of control environment. We then have satisfactory, which is the opposite satisfactory. It is a positive assurance, but there are some issues that need to be addressed that are fundamental to the operational system. Then we have limited, which means there are some significant high risk issues. And then we have nil assurance, where there is fundamental weaknesses in the control environment across the piece. We put advisory where we work, so services will often ask us as lawyers to come and do some work with them as they develop a new system or change their controls. So we do that. We also give you the recommendation, the recommendation types, that high, mediums and lows. But we then follow up on those advisory pieces as well. So the advisory is where we've been asked to go in and give some support. Right. We don't give an overall opinion on the control at that point because we know management are addressing it, and we then go back and do the follow-up work to give you assurance that they've implemented those recommendations.
Yeah, thank you. On Appendix 1, we've got 9 high priority recommendations that need to be reported to this committee. We haven't got the reports.
Is this the follow-up?
Yeah.
Yeah, sorry, I should have mentioned that. So we are actually doing quite a lot of the follow-ups at the moment. Our priority was to get the audits for last year done. A lot of those follow-ups, and particularly that one, which is quite complicated, we're actually doing it at the moment. So when we next report to you, you'll have an updated report of follow-ups, and you wanted more detail on the individual.
Just that we can't say those are reported to this committee. So it's reported
I will make sure that she gets that properly.
Okay.
Yeah.
And then, would it be too much? I know to create a lot of extra, we've got the recommendations, but would it be possible to also summarise those that have been implemented? So we could see the outstanding position on this, or is that
So
going to be too
when we report
complicated?
follow-ups, I think we've got an action to do that. I for some of them, I don't want to dismiss them as fairly trivial. Well,
I think
I don't
we
say
need to show the information so you can then
yeah,
whether it's too much information.
maybe
or
we'll put it into an
that.
appendix and you can decide if it's
Yeah.
too much.
Yeah, and then the changes on 270, I didn't feel that the reasons were that was given to the alterations. There were really reasons to defer or not do.
Okay.
And then I couldn't tie in Appendix 2 to Appendix 1.
So the changes in the plan, is it?
Changes, what is it? Is it page 270? Changes to the internal audit plan.
Are there any specifics in there that you're not?
It says reason audit, and then you're just saying deferred.
Oh,
Move to, it's just what's happened to it. It's not the reason. The reason is limited resources. So limited resources, it was deferred. But
But some of them were specifically.
Some were the service requested us to move. So
Yeah.
the HR pensions admin one where they asked us to move it to allow them to transition the service.
So they are.
Reasons.
Sorry.
I mean, they're not all reasons.
Okay, we can
Yeah.
again we can go with that.
Explanation.
Explanation.
But actually, reasons will be helpful.
Reasons are helpful. Yes.
Okay, are we happy to note the report?
Yes, and you're going on a reasonable overall conclusion.
Yeah.
Yes,
Yeah.
So again, there we should look. Adequate means there are some areas where there's insurance.
But no endemic issue.
Item number 14, anti-fraud annual report. Who's going to?
So I'll just pick that briefly there. So apologies, Andy Hyatt is a fraud who others will know from previous meetings is unwell. To stay at home, so he's testing again today. So just
he's not here.
Again, this is an end of year report, so you have many this evening. And what we do is twice a year set out for the committee the outcomes that the anti-fraud team have achieved. So the table in 1.7 particularly sets out both for the last year just gone, but also the previous 2 years, the successes that the team secured. Now you'll see, broadly over time that there's been some changes in some of the areas of activity because of COVID. So quite a lot of work done on business grants, whereas actually tenancy fraud was more difficult to be investigating going out to properties during lockdown, but that's picking up again now. And actually across the piece in broad terms, we're comparable to the previous 2 years. We have got most of these notional values, so what they say they're notional values. So we have a detailed method for calculating those. I'll send a paper out to committee members who want to see that and how we build those up. Because we're looking often at cost prevention by stopping a fraud or picking up a fraud. In some cases, we'll be recovering sums of money, but not in all cases. So I just want to make that clear there. We also have responsibility for the council's whistleblowing policy. So there are cases which are reported here in terms of those issues that have come forward. And I won't go into detail about the anti-fraud and corruption strategy we set out there, how we meet each of those elements. And the appendices there are just to, first of all, reassure you about the proactive work that's being done, to meet the anti-fraud strategy, and also some helpful case studies in terms of some of the successful outcomes we've had in the previous 12 months. I'm happy to stop there and take any questions.
Committee, any questions?
I have one, but that's going to be part B, Chair.
Okay.
That's all right.
Yeah.
Just ask the lady in Mitcham, you just got her keys back.
So, interestingly, in the tenancy fraud world in London, I mean, there's a lot of sort of there's a prevalence of tenancy fraud in social housing across London, particularly in central London. There are a range of techniques that officers will use to try and recover property. The one that's the one that we like for least is actually going to court to get a property back. That can take months or actually, in some cases, years. So, officers will encourage those people who are subletting their property to give the property back, because they won't have to go through the process of going to court and incur costs. But they haven't got the powers to seize the property, but they have got the ability to encourage them at the consequences of not giving the property up. So they will go through a process of securing what's called a relinquishment, where the tenant agrees to give the property back to the authority so it can be allocated or probably to somebody else who needs it.
And in relinquishing, does she in return, or any particular tenant in return, get a waiver that they won't be prosecuted for the subletting fees that they've been getting?
Well, so again, it will depend on the case. In some cases, we would look to prosecute because of the severity and the magnitude of the case. In many cases, we're looking to get the property back because we can see sublettings being going on for some time, but it does rely on the subtenants actually giving us evidence as well. So actually, that can be difficult to go back over a long period because people and subtenants change quite often. So we focus on where we can to get the properties back, but prosecute those more serious cases where we can as well, because that's a very much deterrent effect. So there's a judgment there, there's a balance in terms of actually the needs to get the property back, but where we can, and we do prosecute a number of cases where they're more serious and they're more long term, and then there's more money being made from that subletting than the case.
Thank you. Can I then ask the committee note the report and the action tracker? Okay. Item 50.
No.
Who's going to present this?
I'm happy to say to you briefly, the forward programme is a list of reports that typically would come to the committee on a cyclical basis or once a year. But this is very much something for you as a committee over today and over the year to be able to ask for other reports to be added to the list, things that you'd want to have in there. So we've tried to identify those reports that would normally come here, who would be the report authors. But it's for you as a committee to decide if you're happy with that, or if you want to.
Committee.
I will have a deep dive on the fragility of the central care market, obviously, in the update on the risk register.
I'm looking at something dated December 2021. Sorry, November 21. Did things drop off this list, or should they drop off this list?
Sorry, yes. In terms of the action tracker, what we do is we leave any item that's open, and by that we mean anything that we think has been completed but you haven't seen as completed yet. So you're happy as a committee that action's been completed. It then drops the completed list, which we're going to prune down because it's getting long. But what we want, obviously, to be able to focus on is the issues which were raised at meetings which either have not yet been completed or we think have been, but we want to make sure you're happy they have. Sorry.
So the item 39 was to be circulated with the agenda. Was that? I haven't seen that.
Yeah.
Follow up on previous committee about the breakdown of the seniority of uncorrelated staff. Have we had that? I'm not sure I've seen that. Okay. Okay, that's sorry, as long as it's noted. That's
We'll pick it up again. Yeah.
Thank you.
So just to go back to we were talking about the forward programme. The forward programme's evolved over time. It took a couple of years just to get to where we are now. because there's 3 new members of the committee, it'd be good. Been through one committee, you've got a sense of how things are. Perhaps we have a virtual meeting or something just to reflect on it as a membership of the committee, and then we can sort of see if minds meet. It's a good thing to have a forward programme. It took a while to get anything. We've now got one, and it does provide a structure. We've kind of failed a little bit this time in that we've got a meeting which is overly heavy, I think.
I think it's been too heavy.
Yeah, it's too heavy because we're
Well, we have
failing like that.
the amount of discussion now has wilted over the last.
Well, it has. It feels a bit wrong. So it's about knowing what's coming up and trying to even out as much as possible the agenda for each of the meetings. I think the other point going into, I think the action tracker is a bit flaky because we don't always get things that were said to be delivered, and there is deferral of quite a lot of things. So I think we've got to have a bit of a think about what resource and priorities given actually to resolving some of the points. Probably again, 3 hours into a meeting, that's not going to be easy to do.
That's something we need to work on as officers and bring back to you.
Okay.
Happy there's part B.
We'll do that in a minute, yeah.
Yeah.
To note. We'll come to part B in a minute, then we close the recording down. Any other urgent business? No? Good. I therefore declare that part A of this meeting is closed. And we wish to move into part B, so the exclusion of the public.